And the meditation on Sri Ramakrishna. Hridaya kamala madhye rajitam nirvikalpam sada sadakhila bhedatitam ekaswarupam prakriti vikriti shunyam nityam anandamurtim vimala paramahamsam Rāmakrishna bhajamaha nirupamam ati sukshmam nishprapancham niriham gagana sadrishamisham sarva bhutadivasham trigunarahita satchit brahma rupam varenyam vimala paramahamsam Rāmakrishna bhajamaha vitaritum avatirnam jnana bhakti prashanti pranaya galita chittam jiva dukha sahishnam drita sahaja samadhim chinmayam komalangam vimala paramahamsam Rāmakrishna bhajamaha. Resplendent in the lotus of the heart, that eternal, blissful reality beyond all notions of existence or non-existence, non-dual, one without a second, beyond the touch and modifications of prakriti, that actionless, formless and exceedingly subtle reality, which is beyond all the three gunas, which is as vast as the sky, yet the indweller and witness in all beings, that one which from time to time takes a form in order to teach the highest peace through devotion and knowledge, though light of limb, quick to enter into ecstatic states, that stainless Paramahansa Ramakrishna we adore. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarva dharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Om yathagnir dahika shakti Ramakrishne sthitahiya sarva vidya swarupam tam saradam pranamamyaham. Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Taparine Om Khalindi Phulla Kamale Madhavena Kridarata Brahmananda Namastubhyam Sadguru Loka Nayaka Brahmananda Namastubhyam Sadguru Loka Nayaka Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Om Gurubhyo Namam Ganganeshaya Namaha. Salutations to Sri Ramakrishna, to Swami Vivekananda, to Swami Brahmananda, and most of all to the Guru Shakti, Jagadatri Durga Mantradishatri Devi, Shri Sarada Devi. May this be an offering at her lotus feet. Om. Peace. Good evening. So as you know, the past week there have been two really important events, like on Monday and on Tuesday and on Friday. So we had two direct disciples that we celebrated. On Tuesday, on the second day of Navaratri, Gupta Navaratri, it was Swami Brahmananda Jayanti, and that's like especially important for us because Swami Brahmananda, as you know, is the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, but also in whose lineage we belong, and there's something very special about studying his life because we find in him unparalleled spirituality. In fact, Swami Vivekananda argued, he said one time, he has surpassed even me in spirituality. And what's interesting about that is there's so many things about Swami Brahmananda that's like uncanny, that kind of challenge our ideas about spirituality and about sadhana and about the role of grace and things like that. And today I wanted to spend a little time talking about Swami Brahmananda, but specifically I wanted to ask this question: who is his Ishta? This is, I think, a very interesting question because, as you know, in the Tantric tradition, whether it's on the right or on the left, like or along the whole spectrum of Tantra, most of the time what it's going to look like is devotion to a particular deity. So if Tantra is anything, whether on the right or on the left, Tantra is essentially Deity Yoga. It's being connected to a particular form of divinity that is aligned with one's own predisposition. We call it guna and karma and tattva. So everybody has a unique spiritual proclivity, as it were. That's the first thing that the Tantric tradition recognizes, is that we're all different, and each one of us has a particular guna, a particular quality that will necessarily make us fit for a particular kind of spiritual practice. So I love that Hosier song, Take Me to Church. There's that beautiful line in there. And truly is a Shakta hymn. And there's a beautiful line in there. It says, my church offers no absolutes. It says worship in the bedroom. And like that idea, of course, is a very Vamachar idea. But like the first line there, my church offers no absolutes, is really important. Because if you take that second line, worship in the bedroom, to be an absolute, then you have a problem. Because then you get an imposition on the right by the left. And often you see the reverse more likely to happen. Imposition on the left by the right. The claim that there is some absolute way to practice religion. There's like some one way to do things. That's the first thing that the Tantric tradition rejects wholesale. There isn't one way. There is many ways, in infinite ways, invariable ways. Variable ways. And invariably, all these variable ways lead to one realization. But the way that each and every one of us has to come to that is necessarily going to be unique. And one good example of this is the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. As you know, it's a somewhat atypical Tantra, because unlike most Tantric texts, which suggest puja and homa and all these very like elaborate ritualistic approaches, the Vijnana Bhairava just describes God as reality and describes reality as the bliss of one's own inner experience. So Bhairava is here not a deity as such, although is approached as a deity theistically. Bhairava here rather is one's own essence nature, which is explained to be just one's own blissful, ever-full inner experience. Sva anubhavananda. Antaha, inside. Sva, oneself. Anubhava, experience. And ananda, the bliss of one's own self-experiencing or inner experiencing. And so in that sense, anything can be a doorway to Bhairava. So all sorts of uncanny spiritual practices are presented, like watching the way light plays on the surface of a rock or on the wall, or like looking into an empty cup, or like staring into the vast sky, or enjoying beautiful food, or making love, or running from a battlefield, or getting a piercing, or anything like that. Basically, just a bunch of mundane, everyday activities, laughing at a joke, seeing a long-lost relative, listening to music, like all these kinds of things. But importantly, when we get to the end of the Vijnana Bhairava, it's like Lord Shiva then says, okay, here are 112 different dharanas, different meditations or different yuktis, different yogas, different means for attaining Bhairava, or rather recognizing your own innate Bhairava nature. But if you say there are 112 practices in the Vijnana Bhairava, in one sense, I think we're missing the point. It's not that there are 112. The fact that there are 112 shows you there are actually infinite. It's like when we say Lalita Sahasranama, there are 1,000 names for Lalita, 1,008 names for Lalita. It's important that there's an extra 8. Do you know what I mean? It's like almost suggesting like, okay, we could just keep going. Like we have 1,000, but here's another 8 to show you that we're not limited by 1,000. It's not like Sahasranama, it's like Sahasracha Ashtanama, like 108 names. We don't say that. We don't say it's a Shatcha Ashtanama, 108 names. Nor do we say it's a Hasracha Ashtanama. It's not 1,008 names. We just say it's 100 named him or 1,000 named him. And then, somewhat cheekily, they just throw in another 8. Why is that? And of course, as you know, there's like something quite sacred about the number 108 or 1,008. There's something about nines that completes a cycle and argues for like maybe a more numerically esoteric point, but I won't go there because I was never good at math, so I can't say anything intelligent. I can't say anything intelligent ever anyway, but especially not about numbers. So I'll leave that whole speculation alone. I don't know why 108 is holy. It is. So, in another sense, the reason 8 is there, I would argue, is just to kind of throw in the idea that we're not limited by 1,000. Lalita has infinite names. Kali has infinite names. Shiva, Vishnu, they all have infinite names. And when we interact with the Sahasranam, you're immediately made aware of that fact. We can just like think of so many different things. I remember when I was much younger, I was in high school, I think it was like 17 or 18 or something. I fell in love with a girl, which is where like all the tragedies occur, but also all the greatest spirituality can be found. And so I remember I thought I would kind of do like a Sahasranam for her. So my whole thing is I just like wrote like 1,000 reasons why I was in love with her. Just for her, like that's my whole problem. It's like I grafted the whole tantric tradition into my life and started living it. And so started worshipping everyone in the way that Tantra taught me to worship God, for what is everyone but God. So I wrote this 1,000, like 1,008 reasons why I was in love with her. And I remember I got to like 30 or 36 or whatever. And those are like the most obvious ones. And then I had to start getting like really creative. Be like, oh, I really like how you, and then like something really niche that I noticed that she would do, and that's what the Sahasranams start to sound like. Like they're just like really, once you get to the 300, 400 names, you get like Shukra Priya, Bali Priya, Rudra Priya, just like in Kali Sahasranam, it becomes very Kali specific, like super niche. And then when it comes to Lalita Sahasranama, it's like Gandharva Pujita, like she who is worshipped by Gandharvas, and then like Rakini, Hakini, Dakini. It becomes so specific, right? Yeah, Deepa Leela and I, we are comparing notes. I'm like, yes. But like we are on that level because here we have all these Sahasranamas, and then when we chant them, we realize, oh my God, each goddess, each deity, what to say of goddesses, like everything in the universe can be maximally described in terms of everything else in the universe. And since the universe is an ever-expanding infinity of expression, like when we say 1008, notice what we're actually saying perhaps is that there's no end to how many names we can give to the deity, meaning there's no end to how much we can appreciate her. There's no end to her qualities, and we can appreciate every single one of those qualities in isolation or all together or one after another. Or in sets, the Sahasranam, you can see like Lalita Sahasranam, the first few work as a dhyana shloka. Shri Mata, Shri Maharagni, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari. That's like a set. You see the creation, maintenance, and destruction function. She's the mother, she's the ruler, and she's the lion rider, the one who destroys in an act of war. So Shri Mata, Shri Maharagni, Shrimat Singhasaneshwari. Then we learn that she's Chid Agni Kunda Sambhuta, Deva Karya Samudyata. Like that's another set, those two names. But then we get just descriptions. Like, a color of her skin, how many hands she has, what she's holding in each hand, just various weapons and qualities of those weapons, like the Ankusha, the elephant goat, is flashing with anger. So we get bhava also, not just her external depiction, but also how she feels within herself. Like Kali, she's described as Hasanmukhi, but also Unmada, she's drunk and happy. And you know that because she's smiling. So all of these descriptions are given, and you can take these in sets. So either you think of these as sets, or you think of them as individual standalone names, or you think of them as all at once, like all together, like however you'd like to approach it. As Sri Rāmakrishna would say, however you eat the cake, straightways or sideways, it tastes just as sweet. And the sweetness of Lalita, of any deity, is infinite. 1,000? No. Here's another 8 to show you that it's not limited by 1,000. I think the Vijnana Bhairava is like that. You get to like 112, and if you think like that's the cap, like Lord Shiva is like, okay, the 112 have been revealed, that's it. These are the total practices that you can do. I think that misses the point. What's happening here, I think, is an invitation to turn literally every moment of life into puja, into sadhana. Basically to spiritualize everything. And that's arguably why Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga is so controversial, or why the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra is so controversial, or why like the whole like Kaulachara, Vamachara approach is so controversial. Because often we insist on some separation between spirit and matter, on transcendence and immanence, on God and world. And when those lines get blurred, it's in that capacity that we sometimes wonder at spirituality. And so Vijnana Bhairava is incredibly controversial and incredibly like edgy, because as a tantra, it invites every moment of life to become a sadhana. But it can't just be 112. I think it's like infinite. There are infinite ways to do that sadhana. So similarly, with with somebody like Swami Brahmananda, Swami Vivekananda, or something like that, like, these are all different readings on Sri Ramakrishna, and they're like infinite ways to read Sri Ramakrishna. And when we come to Swami Brahmananda, we learn something about Ishta Yoga. Because in the tantric world as a whole, there are no absolutes. Like that's the first thing that the tantric tradition is going to offer, is that like you cannot say that this is the only way to do spirituality, but it is true that for somebody that's the case. Like for a particular individual, that's their way, but that being their way doesn't make it someone else's way. So like in the tantric tradition, step one is to recognize there must be a proliferation of means. So whenever we consider a tantric movement, let's say within Buddhism or within Jainism, especially within the Hindu context, whatever that word Hindu means, you'll notice the first thing that happens when something gets tantricized is you suddenly get a bunch of different techniques, different approaches, different modalities. And then someone like Abhinavagupta might come along and try to arrange those myriad modalities into like some kind of system. So he'll say, okay, these are all practices that pertain to Anava Upaya, the way of the individual. And then these practices all pertain to Shakta Upaya, the way of Shakti. And then these practices all pertain to Shambhava Upaya, the way of Shiva. And the Vijnana Bhairava, with its 112 or so practices, has something in every category. There are many Anava Upaya practices, there are some Shakta Upaya practices, but mostly there are Shambhava Upaya practices. Traditions like Zen Buddhism, which are tantric forms of Buddhism actually, Mahayana Buddhism in its Zen form, you'll see a lot of it is Shambhava Upaya oriented. Very rarely is there even any Shakta Upaya, or even Anava Upaya, it's just pure Shambhava Upaya. So like you get categories like this, and masters like Abhinavagupta trying to make sense of the plethora of means. But the only reason why they need to do that is because when you look at the tantric tradition as a whole, it just overwhelms you right away with all the all the different means. And then you're like, okay, which one do I do? Now, the other thing that we pointed out earlier is that the Tantric tradition is about Deity Yoga more than anything, whether on the right or on the left or somewhere in the middle. It's like mostly going to look like this. You have a particular deity, and that particular deity is a reading of the one reality which most suits your proclivities and your predisposition. So that deity is either chosen by you or chosen for you, and then the rest of your life, or at least that period of your sadhana, is just about worshipping that deity. And what does worship look like? Well, for the most part, not like what the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra says. The Vijnana Bhairava is super edgy in that it tries to redefine worship. It says like, oh, you know what puja is? It's not offering flowers and things like that. It literally just comes out and says that's not puja. Puja is when you dissolve into the void in the heart. Or it'll say homa. Homa is not making offerings into the fire. Homa is when you allow every cognition, every sense event to be offered into the void fire of consciousness using the ladle of the mind. Or what is meditation? This is interesting. It says na dhyanam, na tu dhyanam. Meditation is not sharira, aksha, kalpa, mukha, hasta. Like it's not meditating on a particular form of a deity with hands and legs and weapons and eyes and whatnot. So it defines meditation as just restfully abiding in the groundless, formless reality, which you are. So just keep in mind, the Vijnana Bhairava is edgy for this reason, because it overturns or reinterprets or overcodes a lot of what we understand by the terms puja, homa, japa, dhyanam. Just for fun, can anybody tell me what the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra's opinion on japa is? Like, what's the japa, the recitation, the mantra of the Vijnana Bhairava? Just for fun, does that come to mind? Yeah, it's just breath, exactly, Deepa Lila. Deepa Lila, who is now playfully filled with the deep light of reality. So the fullness of that is like experience in breath. When I breathe in and when I breathe out, that is Shakti. Prana Shakti is in the Vijnana Bhairava described as like just the flow of breath. And what's even more interesting is that this flow of breath is called a mantra. It's ajapa japa. And that mantra can be spoken, like you can give it a word form. And you can even think about it. It has a linguistic value also. You know, a lot of bija mantras, they don't have a necessarily like a linguistic or cognitive component. They're just pure vibration, pure sound. But this mantra is pure vibration, pure sound, but it also has a linguistic component. But neither of those are important. Even its vibration as a sound is not important. It's just encoded into the breath. Any guesses? Like, what is that mantra? The Vijnana Bhairava says breath itself is japa. And it tells us, we breathe 21,600 times a day or something like that. It gives us a number. Like, towards the end of the Vijnana Bhairava, there's like a number of times that we breathe in the day. And it's like, see, that's already your japa. Like, all throughout the day, even if you don't repeat any other mantra, you're already inadvertently, automatically, intrinsically doing japa, just as you breathe. Naturally. There's no pranayama suggested here. There's no particular way that you need to learn to breathe. You just breathe. And by the way, it's not something that you do. It just happens, right? Like so, breath just happens. It's not something that you actively have to put on. You just breathe. And then in that breath is a mantra. What is it? What is the mantra of the breath? According to the Vijnana Bhairava, it's like Lord Shiva, and only Lord Shiva can give Diksha. It's very important. Lord Shiva says, here, I'm giving Diksha. This is the mantra. And he says, like, anybody who's sincere should have this mantra. In fact, you can't even get this mantra because you already had it. You already are it. It flows with the breath. What is it? That's it. It's the Hamsa or Soham. Exactly. Good. So the sound is allegedly in the breath. When you breathe in, there's like this sound. We breathe out, there's a sa. And by the way, the reason why this is confusing for some people is because they're like, wait, is the in-breath hum? Is the out-breath sa? Or is the in-breath sa and is the out-breath hum? The answer is, does it matter? Like, it's supposed to be both at the same time, and if you want to break it up, then it could be either. You could flip it around. You could say in-breath is aham. Why? Because when I breathe in, I move into my heart. And my heart feels like a center in which I experience my I-ness, my selfhood. So I say aham. Good, yeah. I love that meditation. It's like such an important part of our tradition because it's about naturalness and easefulness. And you'll see this represented a lot in the Dzogchen and Mahamudra traditions. So when you breathe in, you're breathing into your heart. It's like you're saying, I am. Here I am. You're recognizing your innate being. And notice, it's not a cognitive event. You don't have to think about it. It's innately self-evident that I am. So when you breathe in, I am. Then when you breathe out, it's almost like you're breathing out through the crown of the head. That's what Lord Shiva says in verse 24. Urdve prano hyado jive visargatma para ucharet. And again, look, uchara. Uchara means mantra. The para ucharet, the supreme articulation of the goddess, is this visarga, this movement between these two places, the heart and the space above the head. And visarga, by the way, means something like ejaculation, of course, representing the creative act of Yamala, like the sexual union of Shiva and Shakti. But it also means breath, it also means speech. So here, mantra, like sexual energy, mantric energy, and mantric being speech and breath are all combined. It's prana shakti. The whole thing is kundalini. So when I exhale, that's called a visarga. Namaha, or any word that ends with the visarga, you just aspirate it. Namaha, for instance, right? So even maha, like there's almost like a sense in which maha, it's like a ha kind of sound. So the ha is a breath, it's an out breath. So when you breathe out, it's supposed to go out through the crown of your head. Prano urdhve means go up. So on the out breath, exhale and feel like you're going up and out, the way that kundalini would move in this meditative experience. You're simulating it with the breath. And here you could say sa. That's a mantra. Sa. It's a bija mantra which Abhinava considers to be the highest vidya. So it's a vidya, meaning it attributes itself to a goddess, the goddess Para. So Para, it's so interesting because it's said there in the mantra itself. Para, Uchara, the mantra for Para is the Visarga. And the Visarga is an exhalation. And we also know from other sources, mainly Tantra Loka and many other places, Malini Vijaya Uttara and other places, that the bija for this goddess Para, esoteric, not so much mantra as much as a bija, is Sao. And of course you can understand that to be a mantra when you put Para's name there, Sao Paraye Namaha or something, or Sao Paraye Swaha. This is a vidya. So this vidya, Sao vidya, is just about exhaling, relaxing, reposing in your own essence nature, which is always already the case. What a high teaching that you don't have to stress out about spiritual life. There's no particular ritual. There's no like activity that you need to do or not do. And in one sense, this is the maybe challenging sense, there aren't necessarily any rules. Someone once asked, like, what are your credibilities as an Aghori? Like, it's funny because, like, what, like, do we need a plaque? Do we need a certificate that says, okay, like, I am certified to sit in the cremation ground? Like in Shaivism, the difficulty with Shaivism, and you won't find this in other traditions, like maybe in more Vaishnava context or in more Catholic context, there's like this kind of institution. You know, Hinduism is complicated because there aren't really institutions in Hinduism, except maybe you could say the Shankara Dashnami. Shankara establishes an institution, no doubt. He like builds these mattas and he institutionalizes monasticism. So when you get initiated in the Shankara Dashnami, you get like a special name, you get like a place to live, and then you have a tradition that you follow, and then you know there's like a successor, and that successor is chosen by the current leadership and all that. There's like basically it's like popes, right? Like the Shankara Dashnami is like the Hindu papacy almost. And the Shankaras, they're still called Shankaras, confusingly. There's Adi Shankara, the 16-year-old boy who started all of this. And then not only that, there's the Shankara today, which is he's a young boy actually, the Kanchipuram Shankara. It's like a young kid. It's very sweet. And they're like the pontiffs, or you'd say popes of Hinduism, as it were. But that's only true for the Shankara Dashnami. That would be true for that tradition, the Advaita Vedanta tradition, in Shingari Matta and all the other mattas in India. But then everywhere else, they have their own kind of system. Like when you go to the Kumbh Mela, you'll see there's like the Jun Akara, and there's within the Naga Baba, like Naga world, there's the Jun Akara, and then there are different kinds of Naths and Naga Babas, and they all have their own sampradayas. Some of them carry weapons. They all have their own insignias, you know. And in the Kumbh Mela, it's exciting because you realize just how diverse Hinduism is. And if you want to call it even Hinduism, it's just so diverse. Some of those traditions at the Kumbh Mela might even be outrightly rejected by Sanatana Dharma. And the traditions like that we often represent here are actually very embarrassing for the context of Hinduism at large because they often challenge things like these institutions. So, like, there's no institutional way in which a person especially in the Kaulachara or the Vamachara, becomes what they are in one sense. And that's an important point to make because you'll see here that the claim is that it's innate. It's innate to your being. That you don't have to do any particular thing, like any particular ritual, or you don't have to get rid of any particular thing. Like in the Shaiva Siddhanta, there's this idea of mala, which is the kind of obscuration that actually blocks your vision of reality. But then here in the non-dual traditions of Shaivism, the mala, unlike in Shaiva Siddhanta, is not like a thing. It's not a thing that you need to surgically remove through a ritualistic process that's part of a bigger institution. Rather, it's just one's own inability to recognize what is already the case. It's more ignorance than it is an actual metaphysical property that obscures divine vision. So then here, if you just say the breath is mantra, essentially what you're saying is when you sigh contentedly and when you just relax, when you repose, yes, in your innate being, your inherent nature, that should be self-evident. Like Brigi Deva is pointing out, your self-evident, ever-free light of consciousness. Like that's what you are. That's as simple as sighing into it. It's as simple as relaxing into it. Like recognizing it, pratyabhigya, is relaxing effortlessly into it. That's the bija mantra, Sao. It's a very high teaching. So if you take Sao and you apply it to the Vijnana Bhairava verse 24, you get this idea that like the articulation of the goddess, the mantra of the goddess, is effortlessly sighing into your essence nature. So Sao can be an exhale, a visarga. So if you exhale Sao or Sa, and you inhale Ham or Ha, then Soha, Saha, like that, gives you Soham or Sa Aham. Saham means I am that, or that I am. And then Hamsa means I am that. In one sense, it's the same thing. Whether I say that I am, or if I say I am that, there are two terms that mirror one another. What is that? Well, that we associate to the transcendent, which we call Shiva, or which we call Devi, or Para. Even Para is a better word because it's non-sectarian. It just means, no, it's not actually non-sectarian because there is a sect around the goddess Para. And this Bija Mantra Sao is from that sect. And Abhinavagupta claims that sect around Para is the highest. He calls it Anuttara Trika Tantra. And he leverages it as like the highest wisdom of all the tantric traditions. And he stacks them all in this hierarchy leading to Anuttara Trika. So I shouldn't say that it's not a sect. But as far as the word goes, it's a pretty neutral word. And I think, Deepalila, I think this is the claim that Sao has to do with the inherent nature of breath, because it inherently means to exhale, to sigh. And we typically sigh, by the way, in contentment, don't we? In our appreciation of something. When we're appreciating Lalita, there are 1,008 names, meaning when there are infinite ways to appreciate Lalita, we just think about her and we just sigh. When things are difficult, when times are like scary or overwhelming, there's nothing like a sigh, like a sense of and it doesn't necessarily even need to be relief, right? Because we're not yet relieved. We might still be in the midst of all these things. But if we surrender, that feeling of surrender feels like a sigh, like a deep and slow exhalation, like a kind of like, there are so many things outside of my control, and I am okay with that. I can surrender to the fact that there aren't things that I can immediately do about any of this. And that sweetness, the surrender, it's not the same as like giving up, because that doesn't have the same energy. Like that's like a heavy, exasperated sigh. But even that is beautiful. Like there's something about giving up that's beautiful, that breaks the ego, that like, allows for someone at that point then to find new strength to get up. Of course, giving up is when you fall down and you don't get up anymore. Like that would be giving up. But that's, I think, kind of impossible. No one can really give up forever. Like even if you give up for a weekend or for years or for lifetimes, sooner or later something within you will, as it were, grab you by the scruff of your neck and pull you back up to standing and push you back out into the battlefield. Even if you drop your bow and slump for 10 lifetimes, Shri Krishna will come and say, get up and fight, O Arjuna. Like there's no way that somebody can actually give up. So even that sigh, the exasperated heavy sigh of dropping your bow and like collapsing to the ground in the feeling of being overwhelmed by something, even that is quite beautiful, isn't it? Even that moment is like a moment of surrender. Just that heavy sigh. But there's something else. There's like a much sweeter, almost like lighter feeling, that in the midst of real chaos, in the midst of real overwhelm, there's like a sweet sense that actually it's okay. The dog, like drinking the coffee in the burning house, he's like, this is fine. But I think that feeling is kind of like, just like a soft sao. That sao, that's the breath. But within the breath is the mantra, and within that mantra is a very profound, like vidya, a very profound understanding. And maybe you can articulate that in devotional terms. You could say like, this is an acknowledgement that everything is going to be all right. Hence I can relax, I can breathe out more fully. It's an acknowledgement that my personal effort here is not the thing. It's the goddess moving through us that is the thing to surrender to. Something like that. You can articulate this in devotional terms. The Vijnana Bhairava, of course, will use devotional language, no doubt, but it articulates it almost along the lines of jnana, knowledge, where it's like No, it's my essence nature. And when I sigh, it's relaxing into what is already the case. Hence, there can be no institutional authority. There can be no like circumstance in which this is more true or less true. Like, it's always true. It's always true because it's not what I have. And by the way, if spirituality is something that we have, then it's something that we have to attain. And maybe something that we have to be given. And that's all true, by the way. Spirituality can be given. But it's not a giving. Rather, it's a pointing out. It's an invitation to recognize what already is. So when we say, I have spirituality, that's not entirely in one sense, that's not wrong. It's true to say that. But it's maybe better to say, I am spirituality. That's true of everybody. And the degree to which I recognize that and manifest that is the purpose of sadhana. I don't have to do any sadhana to attain it. Yes? And therefore, when you express the breath and mantra in the same breath, you're saying, like, it's as easy as breathing. Spirituality should be as easy as breathing, because it's not what you have, it's what you are. Yeah, and then you act like you're a river, right? And when you exhale, you're emptying out into the ocean. Or the drop, exhaling to become the... And then, by the way, in the Vijnana Bhairava, there are practices like that, where you imagine your skin to be like the skin of a bubble, and within the bubble, there's space. Outside of the bubble, there's space. Yesterday, there was like this little girl at the Hollywood Temple, and we were there for Swami Brahmananda Puja, and I'm sitting with them, and we're like just making jokes and whatnot. And then she asked me, I asked her what she wants to... She asked me what I want to do when I grow up, or something kind of funny like that. And so I asked her, and she said, I want to be a nun. I thought it was so sweet. I said, Ma, you are Ma already? She's so cute, by the way, this girl. So she was like, I asked her for a blessing. I said, Ma, like, break this clay pot, that the space within may become one with the space without. And then she says, you don't have to break it. That was the most beautiful thing. She's like 9, okay? This girl is like 9 years old. And she said to me, like, just point blank, she looks me in the eyes and she said, you don't have to break it. I was like, whoa. And I didn't say anything. I was waiting for her to continue, but she just stopped there. And I'm like, why, Ma? Why don't I have to break it? And she says, well, you can just immerse it in water. And she's using Rāmakrishna as example, which is 9, it's great. She says, you immerse it in water, and then the water will go in, and the water will be out, and the water will flow through the pores, and then the pot will be intact. And I thought, wow, how beautiful. what a beautiful thing for a 9-year-old to say. It's something that only a 9-year-old can say. But she was so, like, spot on. Like, there's space inside the pot, there's space outside the pot, and the Vijnana Bhairava has all sorts of techniques like this. You imagine yourself to be a bubble, and the space within is enclosed by the skin of the bubble, and the space without is beyond the skin of the bubble. Then as you exhale, just imagine that skin dissolving, like the skin of the bubble just kind of effervescing away. And then that which is within and that which is without is recognized as one. But even while the bubble is there, is it not made mostly of air and empty space anyway? There's no skin, actually. There's no enclosure that makes the inside of the pot formally different than the outside of the pot. They're both the same formless space. And Sri Ramakrishna would teach M. In the Gospel, we find sections where he's talking to M about non-dual meditation. He would teach M to meditate on the formless in this way, to feel like you're a pot. And then within and without are one. And then between the pores of the pot, there's this flowing space. So you can smoke pot, or you can meditate on the pot. You can become a pot. And there are all these like different pot-like things. So much so that Abhinavagupta says, has your reality become a pot? That it's become so inert. But anyway, so this idea of like prana flowing as breath, flowing as mantra. Yeah, of course, as you should. And these are all beautiful. Yeah, Lee. All my favorite things to talk about. So these are all non-dual meditations. And beautifully, they're all about space and whatnot. So the claim that all I have to do is sigh, the bubble becomes one with, the drop becomes one with the ocean, the river becomes one with the ocean, the inside and the outside become one, the jiva becomes one with Shiva. Like that whole conversation, it's just a sigh away. Is Shunya here? There's sigh. Just a sigh away. It's in the Quran, it says it so beautifully too, that God is closer to you than your jugular vein. That's profound. Because usually we make God something far away that can only be attained. There's sigh, good. Just a sigh away. Like God is something out there. And I can only attain God after I do X, Y, and Z. Or I jump through the hoops or something. Or I get some kind of institutional authority or something. Only then can we realize God. But here the claim is different. The claim is no, God is closer to you than your jugular vein. God is your very own. It's so remarkable. God is within you as you. That's the claim. Like, God is not only within you, which is wonderful. Like, to say God is out there in the sky and I should try to like jump through institutional hoops to get God, or like jump through practice hoops or something to get God, that's wonderful. Again, that's not wrong. That's one way to look at things, and that's valid too. But arguably, as Rāmakrishna points out, the deeper way to understand this is God is not out there. God is in all beings. That's slightly deeper. It's called the madhya, a middle understanding, which is not great, because we can do better. But it's still better than saying God is out there, like transcendent only. So if God is, according to this middling understanding, within, okay, that's good too. But go further. No, it's not just that God is within me. God is me. Yeah, and Sonu is like almost like quoting a Kabir poem, right? Kabir is saying, God is neither in the mosque nor in the mandir. Meaning, neither in the temple nor in the mosque will you find God if you can't find God within the heart. And if God is within the heart, then the temple becomes a wonderful place. But if God is within the heart, then what is not a temple? My church offers no absolutes. She says, worship in the bedroom. That's a fine-looking high horse. Right? Like, I love that Hosier song because there's so many places in it in which we look at institutional religion and we say, it's a fine-looking high horse. You know, it's like this idea of God as the transcendent, which brings with it all sorts of other things. Yeah, and there's the whole philosophy from which the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra comes is this lila of play, that God plays as a human being. And what a wonderful play it is. Often it can be a tragedy, often it can be a sweeping romance, often it's a comedy. It is actually at the end of it, usually a comedy. But then Ma claps her hands with delight, having watched the story of a life. Like, you know, even like if your life is ruined for one reason or another, it never is. It like always comes back. The forces that take things apart are the same forces that bring things together, which will later be the same forces that take them apart again. Everything's coming together and being taken apart. People are coming, people are leaving, situations are changing. And it's just Ma playing with her dog, you know. The whole thing is just a Leela of Ma with her jackal having fun. That's it. And that, by the way, is really scary. I remember, oh my god, you guys. This is funny. I'm just reminded of this now. I'll come back to the Brahmananda thing in just a moment. But I was, way back when, I was debating, as you know, for the national team when I was a kid. And we would like get these interviews, you know, like people back home in Malaysia would do these interviews after we would get back from tournaments. So I remember, in one of the interviews, I'm sitting with the team, and then they're like, okay, like what's your secret? Like, when do you perform the best? Like, as a debater, when you're giving speeches, like, when are you at your finest? And then I was like, oh, like, I think success or performance is proportional to fun. I remember saying that in the interview. I was like, the more fun you have, the better you'll do in terms of your, like, debate performance. And then I so remember my partner at that time, Tivish, like, my debate partner, he, like, elbows me and he's like, what he means to say is practice. The more you practice, the better you will do. Because I think like there's like a sense in which we had to present ourselves as ambassadorial or kind of like dignified, and like the idea that like fun was the secret to debating success, I think becomes frivolous. Yeah, like why practice if it isn't fun? Like there's something about fun that I wanted to represent in that interview. But now I'm just remembering, like that was an edgy idea then. In a like Malaysian newspaper interview about like debating. Even then I remember presenting this philosophy of fun, which is informed by the Shaivism that I grew up in. And even then I remember it was like kind of seen as not being serious enough. Like, okay, this is like an interview, like we have to be serious. And so to be serious means you can't attribute fun. Like fun seems flippant. Like what's the purpose of all this? Oh, just for fun. There's almost a threat of nihilism there. You know, like there's almost a sense of like, oh, well, if it's just for fun, that seems meaningless and nihilistic and dangerous, because who dares misery love? Because that's like almost like the price of fun. It's like you have to play the Leela, and the Leela can be quite at times scary, but the point of that is that like it's fun. Yeah, no, it is, and it always will be, I think, and that's the beauty of it. You say Vedanta, Anta meaning end, Vedanta meaning knowledge, but Anta also means edge. So Vedanta is like the edge of knowledge. And these days it almost feels like Kali Sadhana is climbing to a very high cliff and then jumping off. And then just hoping it's bungee jumping, hoping there's the umbilical cord still tied to you. And you're like, Ma, you pushed me off this cliff, and now I just have to hope that you're still my mother and not some demoness that like tricked me into like a false philosophy. Like what the fuck, Ma? Yeah. So sometimes it feels like climbing to a cliff and jumping. But then there's that beautiful Tom Petty song where it's like, actually, whether there's a bungee cord or not, it's free falling, you know? But emphasis on the free. Like it's only when you're falling that you're free. In fact, on the way up, there's a wonderful feeling of climbing. And the higher up you climb, however you'd like to understand that, whether it's in business or whether it's in like music or whether it's in the spiritual field or whatever, like whatever you're doing in life, I notice the higher I climb up, and this has happened so many times, like when I was playing in a rock band or when I was like debating or like most recently, like no matter how high I climb, it's not the climb, sorry, Miley Cyrus, that like is really valuable. Because at some point, there's this like descent. Like some point, just like fall off the cliff or something like that. And that, in one sense, is more thrilling. And the higher up you climb, the steeper the fall. Until we realize that actually we are, like the whole idea of climbing is a superimposition. The whole thing is a fall. Do you know how it's like there's a Game of Thrones line, like chaos is a ladder? It's almost the case that like, no, it isn't. It's just chaos. There's nothing that will come of chaos. There's no order that can come of chaos. It's just chaos the whole way through. And the whole universe is a descent. It's the fools jump off the cliff, and that's always the case. And then there's that Chogyam Trungpa line, which is so beautiful. Like Chogyamji says, like it's like good news is you're free falling. You're free falling, right? But the good news is, yeah. I saw Sandhya Devi typing it out. But like there's like no ground. That's the good news. The bad news is there's no parachute. But the good news is that there's no ground. Right? So the beauty of this is that like you're just falling. But the safety of it comes from the fact that you know what will you hit? Where's the ground? Where will you be dashed? Like where are the stones upon which you will be dashed? Yes. So we're falling. We're just falling, as it were, in love. And I think that's what love feels like sometimes. Falling in love feels dangerous because there's a sense in which we're falling. You know? So we're free falling, but the emphasis is on the free. So coming back to all of this now, fun is scary, and the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra comes from this theory of fun. You know, and the fun here is Lord Shiva or Kali or Para, the transcendent, wanting to experience the fullness of its being by playing all these crazy leelas. And each leela is a new aspect, a new phase. And there must be infinite leelas. Just as there are like 108 names, 1,008 names, or 112 practices, there are like infinitely different ways for the one to play. For Shiva to like explore the fullness of his being. So every individual here, some maybe 55 or 56 of us in this Zoom room, each one is a Leela within the infinite expression of the divine. And everyone, therefore, is going to express the divine differently. And what is the expression of the divine? In one sense, it's yearning. It's almost like the inherent nature of the divine, now borrowing from the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy a bit. The inherent nature of the divine is Vyakulata or Viraha. It's a yearning for itself. The whole thing is like a love story. So it's almost as if I pretend not to be what I am, and then I yearn for myself, and then I look for it in everyone and everything. So I look for my own infinity in finite things. And in the beginning, I have to reject those finite things because I'm not able to like be satisfied. Because what I want is myself. What I want is my infinity. Self, capital S. I can't get it insofar as I'm projecting myself outwards. And that's true of God too. Because there's the Ferrari, and then there's the relationship, and then there's the house, and then there's God. And all of these are objects that are outsourced. My happiness becomes outsourced. It's when I get these things that I will be happy. And sooner or later, I'm going to have to come to the conclusion that that doesn't work. You know, it doesn't work for me to look for happiness in the Ferrari or in the food or in the friend or in God. Because ultimately, that quest is a quest for myself, and I am that. It's not that I have that. I am that. I can't attain that. So everything I attain maybe fails to point to the fact that I am this thing that I'm attaining. Then comes an interesting kind of turn where I look away from this externalized thing and I look within and I say God is within me. That's like maybe the second phase. And then as I articulate this quest for the within, I realize it's also another object. And the one who is looking within realizes that that which is within is me. I am it. And then comes this third phase, this beautiful phase where it's like, wait, and what isn't that? So the finite, which wasn't satisfying before, is now infinitely satisfying because it's recognized to be the infinite. So now in everything, I find myself. And so nothing is rejected. In the beginning, everything is accepted out of ignorance. You see, in the beginning of spiritual life, we say, I want something outside of myself. And at first it's a Ferrari or like, or some kind of food or something, or some kind of friend or something. And then it becomes God, which is external something or other, which is really like a very subtle form of a Ferrari. And then that stops, that looking outside stops. Everything is accepted out of ignorance, that stops. And then everything is rejected out of knowledge. But something is there beyond ignorance and knowledge, no? we can just call it madness. Because that which goes beyond ignorance and knowledge, there's no word for it. It's non-dual. It's madness. Knowledge is still dualistic because it suggests that some things are ignorance. So some things are bad, some things are impure, and maybe not even that. Some things are external. Yeah, Subtle Ferrari. And it's a good band name. It sounds like one of those names like when you make I don't know, you make a few different anonymous accounts on Reddit or something, they give you like a name. A Subtle Ferrari sounds like a cute one. Or like when you're on a Google Doc, you can be called Subtle Ferrari or something Aardvark or something. It's cute. Anyway, so if you have this inward search, then when you look inside, it's like you reject the outside. That's knowledge. Knowledge proposes a viveka. A viveka meaning a discernment between something inside and outside, and then necessarily a vairagya, meaning a renunciation or a pushing away of that which is outside for the sake of something within. And that within is discovered to be effortlessly me, as simple as sighing, as simple as breathing, as innate as my very life, closer to me than my jugular vein. What institution can give you that? What practice can give you that? What condition do you need to fulfill to get that which you already effortlessly are? This is the challenge of the Vijnana Bhairava. This is the invitation of the Vijnana Bhairava. Just to recognize your innate nature as boundless, free, ever pure consciousness. Now, having recognized that, we go beyond knowledge, because knowledge then transforms into this madness. And the madness is actually even those things that I considered ignorance, those things that I considered impure, those things that I thought were in the Bhupura, which I rejected in my quest for the Bindu, I now realize are no less the Bindu than the Bindu is the Bindu. So I rush out back into the Bhupura and reaffirm all of those things that I had to put behind. And then I can finally say Purnam Idam. And that's a really good point, Kalidasa. It's like if I go to the Adha, that which is beyond, and by beyond here is no longer understood to be outside but within. The transcendent is within. If I go to the beyond, Purnam Adha, then Purnam Idam. Only then I can say this too is full. Is pure. So yes, this is the kind of theme of Gupta Navaratri, because Matangi, Raja Shyamala Navaratri, and it's a very fierce Navaratri. Gupta Navaratri means we're really thinking about Vamachara, Kaulachara. And maybe, because I've tried to be as public and vocal as I could about a tradition that is very private usually. And I was just talking to Guru Deva about it the other day. And he was like, so how did your grandfather practice this? And I had to admit, I'm like, yeah, like in the jungle. I was like, he did most of his sadhana, on my mom's side, my Shakta side. He did most of his sadhana in the jungle. And then I was inspired by Swami Vivekananda's like, let's take from the jungles into the city that which is nourishing for all, right? Like this idea of like, let's like make public that which is secret. If it's got some kind of spiritual value, it might as well be made public. But actually, there's like a real wisdom around the secrecy of Vamachara. So when it comes to Gupta Navaratri, that's what the Navaratri is about. It's about rituals that you do at night by yourself in the smashan or in the jungle or like outside the pale of society. And Matangi is one of those secret forms of the goddess. Secret because what her invitation is always is to like recognize the impure as the pure, which can be incredibly disconcerting in the knowledge phase. Like in the ignorance phase, like it doesn't help people very much to just say everything is God, because it won't be nourishing. It'd be like, oh, if everything is God, I might as well just like indulge in all my like sense appetites and like I might as well just like live the way I've always been living. But we all know that doesn't work. You get to a point where you realize like there's only so many parties we can go to looking for some kind of happiness there that we never find. So then we come to spiritual life, and that makes sense in spiritual life for like a long time to reject those things that I previously used to find happiness in, because it wasn't working. So now I reject those things. The Matangi teaching might be kind of out of sequence there. Because for someone in that phase, a stricter pure and impure kind of narrative might be very helpful. And that's why like Vedachara, Shaiva Siddhanta, this is the bulk of a person's spiritual life usually. Then the Matangi stuff, like this Gupta Navaratri, Raja Shyamala, kind of Vamachara, Kaulachara stuff, it's supposed to come at this point in the sequence where we think, oh, well, now having made some progress towards the Bindu, we ask, is that which we rejected, supposed to be rejected, or is it something other than what the Bindu is? And then we realize, oh, like maybe not. Maybe that Bindu, which we're coming to understand more and more, is present in the Bhupura. So then those things that are rejected those things are all reasserted. So in the Vijnana Bhairava, it's from that modality. It's from the Kaulachara modality that we claim that you are effortlessly, easefully this reality. That teaching is not going to help someone for whom that's not readily apparent. For some people who are told, it's as simple as breathing, it won't work. Because how many of us can breathe in this way? How many of us can relax into what we already are? It's the donkey story, like the donkey is like anyway, I don't need to get into this, but the donkey, and they tie it with the fake string, and then they like go through the motions of untying it, like that's all very important. But the Vijnana Bhairava comes to us at a time when we're ready to just recognize there is no rope, there is no limitation, there is no bondage. And that kind of thing makes the Vijnana Bhairava a secret text. But it's beautiful because at one point this text, which was so secret, which was known to only a few people, now there are so many translations. It's available everywhere. Though the tragedy is, though something is made available en masse, that which is easily attained is not often so easily understood. So it's not often the case that just because you have access to it, you can profit from it. So even though the Vijnana Bhairava is available everywhere, the ethos of it is kind of hard to get into, which is this effortless, spontaneous spirituality. So anyway, coming back to this exhale is mantra-sized. It's a vidya, sao. And that sao, that vidya, which you can articulate with the exhalation, with the breath, is itself not just a vidya in that sense, but a vidya in the sense of understanding. The knowledge here is I am effortlessly Shiva, always have been, always will be, and this entire universe is my play. And everything in this universe is a reflection of myself. I am experiencing myself in ever new forms for no other reason than for fun, for the sake of aesthetic rapture, chamatkara, for poetic delight. And so one then re-engages with the world for the sake of poetic delight. Which means, and this is very important, which means being involved in samsara. That's why Bhairava is a fierce figure, because it's a fierce sadhana. It means a kind of acceptance of the whole spectrum, because it would be naive to say, oh, like now if I engage in samsara, I'll only get the good parts. In other words, if I drink all night, then I will only feel bliss and I won't wake up with a headache or I won't throw up. No, if you want to engage with drinking, you have to also engage with the fact that you'll get a headache and you'll throw up. Like the whole spectrum has to be accepted. So either you reject the whole spectrum, or you accept the whole spectrum. There isn't really an in-between here, as it were. So knowledge is purnamada, purnamidam, or shunyamada, shunyamidam. Either shunya, this is empty and that is empty, so I'll disengage, or that is full. And if I discover that is full, can I say this is empty? If I say purnamada, shunyamidam, that makes sense. And from the point of view of knowledge, that makes sense. This is nothing, that is everything. And by that doesn't mean that necessarily means this, something deep within. This transcendent reality which I am is full, and the rest of the world is empty. God alone is real and everything is false. That's fine. That actually makes sense from one point of view. From another point of view, what is all of this if not God? Is there something other than this reality? And if there isn't, then I have to say, Purnamada, as is the transcendent full, so is this immanent full, Purnamidam. So the immanent, this reality which I experience in my embodied form, is the uchara, the mantra of Para, the transcendent, who can be understood as Kali or Shiva. So in a almost like non-sectarian way, the word para just means the transcendent, it just means God. So this entire world is God's articulation, God's speech, the word that was with God, the word that was God. So this world is that word. World is just one la dropped from word. So it's almost like God is a rapper and this whole thing is like God just mic dropping and saying word. This is it. But why? Just for fun. And what is that word? The word's so crazy. There's like the mantra that describes the entire universe. That word is, in one sense, onomatopoeic. It doesn't mean anything except the sigh you get when you surrender, when you express, when you ejaculate, when you're satisfied, or when you're appreciating something, or the sigh you have when you're done with something, or when you've completed a task, or when you're marveling at your own creative brilliance. Like everything contained in that sigh. And there's no difference between bliss and love, and we use these words, ananda, prema, all of these things. There's so many words that describe bliss. And notice the thing about breath. If you exhale completely, you yearn to inhale again. Haven't you noticed? Like the inhale, like you can't help it. You just like want to inhale. Isn't that so beautiful? Oh my god, I could riff on this for the next like hour or two. Like the whole Krishna Leela, the whole Shiva Shakti Leela is in this moment when you empty your lungs completely. And in that emptiness, oh my god, you feel the viraha, right? Do you know, this whole teaching is given in the guy who's like being waterboarded in the name of sadhana. Like a guru holds his student's head under the water and then the student's about to drown and the guru pulls the student's head out and is like, when you want God, he's like, what do you want? What did you want then in that moment when you were like suffocating? And the student was like, I wanted air. And the teacher says, well, yes, when you want God like that, then come back to me. Because most of us, we don't want God like that. We want something else. But notice, it's the teaching around breath again. It's like when you don't have any way to breathe in, there's nothing in the world that you want more than to breathe in. from a Vamachara, Kaulachara, Agori point of view, which really gets us into trouble, you could say it's like needing to pee. Like God is like the need to piss. Like there's nothing more important to you when you need to piss than like finding a toilet, or in India, like just finding a place. And like the desire to piss, that like takes your whole life. Yeah, Nikila Devi. It's like Bhairavi saying here, the forced exhale and forced inhale. It's like the fire of that. There's something about needing to pee or needing to inhale, like needing to breathe. Like that's the key here, because there's a yearning, right? Inherent in the breath is a yearning. And then notice, when I'm full, when I've taken everything in, isn't there this like yearning, this intense yearning to flow out? Like I can't just stay in that fullness. And Sri Rāmakrishna gave this teaching in terms of music also. Like, so like check this out, right? Like this idea that you have this like scale, let's say, and this like what do you call it? Like a seventh note. So like the chakras, right, going from Muladhara, and say the octave is like the eighth chakra, which technically is returning to the first with 7 notes, right? Saregama Padani. So if you just go up the notes, this note here is the 7th, the Locrian scale. But notice how dissonant it is. Like it's almost like yearning to come back to the, like it just longs to get to this. Even if I go higher, it's like and you want to come back. There's like this like desire to be on the thing. So it's like Sri Rāmakrishna would say, imagine you're going up the scale and you just stay on this note. That knee note, it's like, sorry, I'm not a good singer, but like if you like stay on this note, it's dissonant actually. After a while, it feels dissonant. So Sri Rāmakrishna says that's like keeping your mind in one plane. Yeah, dissonant. It's like a dissonant note. And so he says like, yeah, like you just, sorry, just for the sake of completion, we're gonna get the 8 in there. So it's just a dissonant note that Sri Rāmakrishna says, I don't want to be like that. He says, Mother, don't make me a dry monk. I don't want to just be like one note. I don't want to be dissonant like that. I want to play ragas and raginis. In other words, I want to go up and down the scale. I want to shred. I want to play all the different notes. I want to feel the full spectrum of reality. So notice, at the top, which is the transcendent, say you're in samadhi, the bliss of samadhi, can you stay there? Can you keep your mind there? Arguably, no. Arguably, like if you try to keep your mind there, there's this desire to like express again, to come out and do something about it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. And so notice, even when I exhale and I'm empty, I yearn to be filled. That's my predicament, right? We are jivas, and as jivas, we feel ourselves to be finite and therefore empty. So we go to parties and we like try to make money, and we try to like do this, we try to do that, and we try to be civil at the debate tournament interviews and things like that. We're on this like quest for fullness because we're empty. What is that yearning? Our claim is so simple. Just follow that yearning. If that yearning is for chocolate cake, go and eat chocolate cake. If that yearning is to be a rock and roll musician, go and be a rock and roll musician. Or if you want to like, yeah, I want to shred, quote Ramakrishna. Like Ramakrishna 1882, I want to shred. Yeah, I think he would be shredding right now. But like, what do you want? And like, our claim is just so radical, which is like, why don't you just do that? It doesn't end there, you know, like say you want chocolate, if you take chocolate cake, it doesn't end at chocolate cake, then one realizes there must be something chocolatier, and then you go deeper and deeper and deeper into yearning. And ultimately, that ultimate yearning is the yearning for God. So this is what it feels like to be fully empty, to get to the point where you're truly, totally empty. That's why even giving up, even being overwhelmed by life is a wonderful thing. Even like getting to rock bottom is a wonderful thing. Because only when we feel like totally, totally emptied out that the yearning becomes particularly strong. So as we always say, like we never apologize for suffering. We never ask for suffering to be reduced. We never push it away. And we never wish that it be lessened. That's like the test of Kali sadhana. Who dares misery love? Who dares hug the form of death? Who dares dance in destruction's dance? I once joked in Michigan, and it's kind of uncanny like how much I mean this, but I once joked in Michigan that like Kali practitioners practice curses. But not really. Obviously their goal is not to curse anyone. Their goal is to realize God. And so interestingly though, like there's a lot of overlap between the curse tradition, the Abhichara tradition, and the Kaula Marga, you could say. Like waning moon kind of sadhanas, new moon kind of sadhanas, fierce deities like Ghora forms with fangs and Dakinis and all, like they're associated with curses, right? So I was joking in Michigan, we were like getting a homa going, and for Kuleshwari, I was like, the first homa that we were doing together was so sweet. And oh, it was so beautiful. Right as we lit the fire, right as Ma was being involved, I think just before I said the mantras to bring Ma into the fire, all the jackals started howling. Wasn't that so beautiful? And it's only like in that setting that you appreciate the jackals, because it's like the dead of night in the Michigan forest and your hair stands on end when you hear all these jackals howling. I'm like, is there a sorority nearby? Sorority girls? No, the jackals, they sound like bloodthirsty Dakinis, you know? The Shiva, they're called Shiva, like Shiva Bhyo, like just named after Shiva and Shiva. And they're howling, and they were howling just as we lit the fire. And so I was making this joke. I said, you know, it's almost like we're doing this curse work, but in the context of Kali sadhana, we're deflecting the curses back to us. We're redirecting the curses to us. Like we're cursing ourselves when we do Kali sadhana. No cap. Because what we're asking for is very interesting. We're saying, like, be quick. I asked Sandhya Devi a long time ago in Denver, as I was carefully explaining the concept of Guru Mandala and how there is no particular individual who is the Guru, but it's the Mandala that is the Guru, and that Kali is the Guru. As we're talking about this concept, we're like, we're now in front of Kali. Let's pray. What do we want? Like, what is the object of us coming to this sadhana? And Sandhya Devi, like, just off the bat was like, here's my neck. Let's go. I want a quick, clean Kadaga chop. And that's what we're asking for. We're asking for Ma to reveal all that is inauthentic in us, to shine a light on all the dark places that we may integrate those things, that we may become free, truly free. And what does it mean? It means to be free of pretense, arguably. But the unveiling is like this very difficult thing. And so we're asking for a quickened kind of thing. So therefore we say, who dares misery love? Who dances destruction's dance? Who hugs the form of death? To him the mother comes. So it's almost this like mad joy that in Kali sadhana we get when things are being destroyed. That's the free fall that we like crave. The only reason we climbed up to the cliff, as it were, the only reason mother exalts us at all is so that we can hop off. And either we do it or she pushes us off or something. By some way, shape or form, we find ourselves free falling again. And then that's when we realize we're free. That none of those structures ever defined us. And all the things that brought us comfort weren't really that comfortable. They were just complacence, disguised as comfort. You know, I'm starting to feel like all comfort is just complacence disguised as comfort. And it's not until we lose those structures that are almost always external that we discover our own strength. We find our stuff, our inner metal. And that's the beauty of it. That's why I feel like Socrates would never have opted out of that trial. A lot of people were helping him opt out, right? Like there are a lot of influential friends that were trying to help him get out of his predicament. Or even with the Christ, there were many places where you could kind of opt out of that Leela. And say the temptation of the Christ, it's so beautiful because in that, is it a Scorsese film? I forget. Actually, who did the last temptation of the Christ? I forget. But in that film, and Willem Dafoe plays a very convincing Christ, right? Wait, I'm mixing up all my Christ movies now. But in that film, the whole premise is that the Christ opts out of his sadhana, meaning of the moment where he's crucified, because he chooses instead comfort. Notice what happens. He gets off the cross and he chooses to get married and have children and live a beautiful and safe and nice life. And at the end of all of it, his disciples are there. Have you seen this film? You have to. It's unbelievably important and painful and hard to watch because it's about somebody opting out of the Kadaga. The Kadaga is coming and they're choosing not to accept it. Oh, I didn't know that it was a book, Jaya Devi. Wow. Cool. It's called The Last Temptation of Christ, right? Yeah. And tolerant. Very cool font there. But yeah, in the Gnostic Gospel of Judas, exactly. So it's Jesus instructs Judas to turn him in. That's very important. I think even in the Last Temptation of Christ, there's an element of that where Judas is Judas is actually Christ's true disciple. And Christ is I need you to do this thing for me because this is what the Leela demands. Or weirdly enough, it's almost this is what would benefit my sadhana. I don't know, taking Christ in a more human way, in terms of a sadhaka, from a Kali or Bhairava point of view, we can be from an absolute point of view, exactly that. That's the Leela, right? It's kinky. It's a very kinky Leela because God wants to experience that suffering and that whole... by the way, it's so funny. Once I gave a talk at the Vedanta Temple, actually, in Hollywood, and there I said something suffering is the only thing that God cannot do as God. And so God yearns to experience the full spectrum of being. So God yearns to be a human in order to experience suffering. And then I pointed out that the role of the avatara is to experience maximal suffering. Because haven't you noticed? Every avatara's life is terrible. Like Rama. What a terrible life. Rama falls in love, and then with Rama, he's exiled from the kingdom, and not only that, his beloved, just as they're starting to enjoy life in the forest, his beloved is kidnapped. And can you imagine just coming home one day after chasing a golden deer around the forest and finding your beloved no longer there? And by the way, she's the one that asked you to go and catch the deer, and then you come back and then she's gone, and you realize, oh my God, somebody has stolen my wife. What a terrible thing. That used to happen a lot, right? Like back then. Even now I notice, like there's some anthropologists who study this whole like tradition of wife stealing. Like in some Greek, rural, pastoral Greek settings and some mountain settings, it's still a thing. Like people just like steal women as they would steal property. It's a horrific kind of idea, but it's like, no, like that happens. Yeah, right? And it happened to Rama. How terrible to love someone, a human being who you have a relationship with, and then someone comes and just like takes them. Like, what the fuck? And so he then has to walk all over India trying to find her. There's no like WhatsApp or like Google Maps thing. Like he doesn't know where she is. All he has to go off of are some jewelry, discarded jewelry on the ground. I mean, can you imagine the tragedy of that, the heartbreak? And so Rama cries. That's important, that Rama, who is God incarnate, is weeping when he loses his wife Sita. He doesn't know where she is. So then he marches up and down India, establishes an army, crosses over, is involved in a siege for like God knows how long, finally gets her back, only to be told that she's impure because she's been living in another man's house for God knows how long. And so then she has to go through this whole trial, literally a trial by fire where she proves her purity, etc. And then they're able to go back to the kingdom. You can only imagine like what that night must have been like for Rama. He probably slept on the couch because she was like, what? Like, you let me do that? Like, you let me do this whole, like, purity test to prove to your people that I was pure? Like, you didn't stand up for me? I imagine it was complicated. I don't know. Like, as a married person, I imagine, like, that was a complicated conversation they both had at the end of that whole episode. Anyway, then they try to live happily again. But maybe it's a little too late because after a while, the rumors start up again. And I don't know. I think Rama, he could have chosen to stay with Sita, right? I think it's interesting. It's almost like a Jesus, like choosing the cross or opting out of the cross kind of thing. Because he could have chosen the comfortable thing, which is to stay with Sita. But instead, he chooses the route of most suffering. Weirdly enough, he chooses to like send Sita away to go live in the forest hermitage. And he chooses to stay alone in the kingdom. And we know he's like depressed. He doesn't have his Sita with him. They're trying to get him to remarry, but he can't because he's like in love with Sita. And so much so that when he's doing Vedic Yagya, which requires your wife to be at your side, he like constructs a golden Sita, like a murti of Sita, a vigraha to have on his left side while he's performing the ritual. So the poor guy, he's like in love with a woman who he'll never be able to be with because of the circumstances of his life. To me, some of the greatest romance in the world is not when there's like a loss of love, but when there is love and not an ability to stay together anyway. Isn't that beautiful? Like you love someone, but you can't be with them anymore for whatever reason. That's a beautiful thing, whether it's natural death or some other cause that separates people. And that's Krishna and Radha, exactly. Haven't you had that feeling like in high school? I think Blink-182, sorry, some of you will not like this, but I'm a big fan. But in like the Blink-182 kind of like bhava of being a senior in high school or something, and then it's time to go off to college, right? Like that feeling of like, oh my God, the person that I love is going off to college. Like we're going to be parted by distance. And not only that, the feeling of like, well, what if this changes something? What if as a result of the distance, there's going to be like a distance in our romance? It's not for loss of love. It's just some circumstance that I can't control. So anyway, coming back to this. Yeah, Mark and Tom are Rāmakrishna. And they've been abducted by aliens or something, right? Like, oh my God, like that guy is like an activist for aliens. It's amazing. What a beautiful Leela this is. Anyway, coming back to this last temptation of Christ thing, notice Rama, poor Rama, he like exiles Sita, and at the end of everything, he doesn't even know that he has children, and his own children come and do this kind of like Hamlet play within a play thing, where, can you imagine, his children are in the court, like reenacting the Ramayana, Rama's Leela, in front of Rama. So he's reliving his trauma through his like two children acting out his life. And then he discovers that they're his children. And then he like sees Sita and he's so excited to be reunited with her. And then what happens? The whole court explodes in jeers and boos and things like that. And Sita's like, ground opens up, she jumps back into the ground, is never seen again. And so Rama ends his life on his knees, weeping. He's like broken. Like, can you imagine Rama, the paragon of dharma, ends his life a broken, mixed up mess on the floor of his own court, all around him, everybody jeering. Just imagine that scene. It's thrilling. Just think about it. Like God himself chose to incarnate so that at the culmination of that sadhana, of that Leela, he finds himself surrounded by the people he sacrificed everything for, and they're all jeering and booing at him for like accepting back into his life a wife that is no longer pure. Just imagine that. And that very wife that he's in love with, he now has to like give up for reasons that he cannot control. And there he is on his knees, crying, suffering. That's Rama Leela. Krishna Leela, oh my God, he had to watch his family fight and attack one another, and he watched the Dwapara Yuga turn into the Kali Yuga, and there he is, under a tree trying to take a nap when he's shot like a common animal, having watched his entire kingdom, which he was tasked to defend, burnt down to shreds. Like, Krishna's life is an utter failure. Haven't you seen? At the end of the Mahabharata, it's a failure. Like, the Kurukshetra war, nobody wins. It was morally ambiguous at the start. Like, going into that war, it was like really problematic. And then the war itself was really problematic. Like, during the war, a lot of tragedies occur. There were heroes on both sides. I almost imagine like the opening for the Star Wars thing. It's like, war, episode 3 in the Star Wars saga, it opens with war. And there are heroes on both sides and villains on both sides. And the whole thing is confusing. War is confusing. And it's destructive. Like the Jack Black song. It's like nobody wins. And in the Kurukshetra war, notice they do all of that. They go through all this Leela only for the kingdom that they were trying to save in the end to be destroyed anyway. And somebody cursed Krishna. Can you imagine that Krishna is subject to a curse? Like, a mother of a child who died in war cursed God, who was responsible for that war in the first place. And God has to suffer the curse of a widower, a curse of a weeping widow. Wow, what a beautiful sentiment, that God has to suffer the curse of a weeping widow. And so there is Krishna, having watched his entire kingdom destroyed, trying to take a nap under a tree when somebody shoots him like a common animal. So he dies, like he's shot under a tree like an animal. What? That was the curse. Then look at Buddha dying of hunger. He's dying of a stomach ache because he had eaten some poisoned meat or something. But like, not even that, right? It's not just that the fact that he died kind of horrifically. His whole life was really tragic. I mean, of course, up to age 30, he's living in the most beautiful circumstance possible. But then notice, like, for the next few years, he's just dusty and hungry and starving, like in the woods with some other dusty, naked, skinny guys. Like, he's doing that for a really long time, and then he learns the middle way. You know what happens? All his disciples reject him. That's really not his disciples, his colleagues reject him because they see him eating. This is so beautiful. They see him eating the rice pudding that this beautiful woman is giving to him. And then they're all like, whoa, that's not spirituality. You're supposed to be an ascetic. That's not cool. And they all ditch him. So with Krishna, people abandon him. With Rama, people abandon him. With Buddha, people abandon him. And what to say of the Christ? At the end of all of that, his Leela of love, at the end of all of that, his foremost disciple, Peter, denies him thrice. And he says so. He says, you will deny me thrice. And he has no problem with that. He forgives Peter for doing that. And then he's dragged through the streets and like whipped and all that stuff. And again, like Rama, it's the jeers of the crowd. And he dies this horrible Leela. So I was making this point in that talk that the Avatara Leela is about God's desire to experience suffering. And at that level of Leela, the suffering can become so intense that the rest of us look at that and we're like, whoa, thank God we're not that. But God wanted to be that. Like, God uniquely chose that. And that's why Jesus. Anyway, so I gave this bit, right, about how suffering is God's opportunity to experience something that she can't otherwise experience unless she takes on a human body. And the avatara is the highest expression of that suffering. So my whole thing is that this world is fun and suffering is fun. And the most fun is synonymous with the most suffering. And that's why the avatars have had the most fun, actually, because they've had the most intense life. So what's so crazy? I gave this talk, and I kid you not, I swear on the Bible this happened after. I got off the platform and I went outside, and somebody came up to me and he said, if my family was here and they heard what you said, they would kill you. I'm not going to kill you. I'm just really angry. And like, he was like shaking with rage. It was really interesting. And he was like threatening to like physically attack me outside the temple because I had said that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I went to see Gurudeva about it. I was like, March, so like, I didn't really say anything to this guy. Like, I don't really understand this whole teaching about hissing because I was not really sure what to like do in that situation. I was just like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. But he was really offended by the idea that like suffering is the point, or that avatars are here to suffer, and that it was good that Jesus suffered. In fact, like, it was not to like atone for our sins, or it was not to like achieve some kind of ends. Like, that was an end in and of itself. Suffering is an end in and of itself. That claim, it was so crazy. That was the first time I realized the controversial nature of what it is that we're talking about, because that claim itself incited someone to rage, to violence, just randomly, you know? It's remarkable. But notice, the last temptation of the Christ plays on this idea of like choosing comfort and safety over the Leela of suffering. So the Christ at any point can opt out. Even Socrates could opt out. Like, he didn't have to drink the poison. He could have just like left. Like, many of his students were giving him like opportunities. They were saying like, oh, you can go out through the gate at this time because we bribed the guard. Or my father is like in charge of the shipping company, and so there's a boat ready for you. And not only that, they were presenting him with a life that seemed to be ethically good. Like he would go off to maybe, I think, where was it? Like across the sea, and there's like a place where they're starting a school, and they were like, Socrates, if you go there, you can teach at that school, and that would be like obviously your ideal life, right? And Socrates was like, nah, it's fine. I'll just like stay here in the prison and drink the poison. Why not? And accept the charge, which is to say, like, yeah, like what the court is saying of me, which is like I'm corrupting the youth, I'll accept it. Which is crazy. Like he's accepting the charge, he's accepting the poison, rather than taking the opportunity that he's being presented at every step to like walk out. And Plato would eventually go there, right? He would go to that place and start the academy. So Plato's academia allegedly is supposed to be Socrates' school. But Socrates is not a teacher. He's, in one sense, an avatara. He's a mystic. He's a saint. And not all mystics or saints become teachers. You know, almost like a teacher's job is to present the message of the mystic, because mystics are often very short-lived in almost every part of the world except India. And even there, their legacy can be short-lived too, you know, because the moment like it's no longer fashionable. That's why Agores, Kaulacharas, Vamachara, like this whole kind of world it cannot be mainstreamed, because this is arguably the cost of any kind of, you know, Buddha digressing or anything new offered in spiritual life must necessarily go through a process of being rejected. And that's good. It's good that we like test things before we accept them so readily. In any case, we see with the last temptation of Christ this option that the Christ is given to like step off the crucifix, and like live a regular life with a wife and children and whatnot. And just, you should see the film. It's beautiful. It's beautiful because he realizes at the end of that comfortable life that he chose comfort, which is complacency disguised. He chose comfort over like the real Leela. Right? Yeah. So Vedanta. Anta meaning the end. Veda meaning knowledge. End can also mean edge or like ledge. So Vedanta is edgy knowledge. It's cutting edge. And therefore, it's always going to be challenging. Like Vedanta, the Upanishads are very challenging. They've been normalized now, though. So any new reading of anything will necessarily be edgy. And because it's edgy, it's challenging. That's true in music. It's true in business. It's true in spirituality, too. Today, I think Neptune entered Aries or something like that. The moon is in Taurus, and Neptune is in Aries. So it's like a good time to just like kind of almost like double down on that which makes one different or new. And then to say like that's what Vedanta is about. The cutting edge. But the cutting edge cuts like a motherfucker, doesn't it? It's like spiritual life is like walking a razor's edge. And the first cut is the deepest. But it hurts so good in that sense. So like we don't opt out of suffering. The ones who worship Kali, they're uniquely able to say, who dares misery love? Who dances the destruction's dance, who hugs the form of death? And death comes in every form. The death of the body, which is arguably quite mild compared to the death of one's character, one's name, one's position, the death of one's digital self, the death of one's concept of oneself. Like death on every level is the kind of thing that the Kali sadhaka craves. So it's in suffering that we say we feel God's grace the most. Not necessarily only because suffering purifies us, but also because in and of itself it's enlivening. Never do we feel so alive as when we're falling in love. And sometimes it feels like falling. I think like there's like a beautiful line from Steven Tyler. Somebody mentioned this band earlier today at school. And there's an Aerosmith song where Steven Tyler says something like, falling in love is hard on the knees. But that's what we do. Yeah. Okay, so having said all of this, coming back to the ledge, the free falling idea, it's like, actually we've digressed quite far afield, but coming to the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, the reason it's such an edgy text is because it's like that. It invites us to meditate and pray and do things in a way that's like kind of uncanny. But having said all of this, right, the ethos from which this comes, the kind of central idea here is that this whole universe is a universe of play. And the whole expression proceeds from a fullness that is inherent. And because it's inherent, it's as simple as sighing. God is closer to you than your jugular vein. The claim that it's like a vein pulsing with blood is important. Like God is a living reality, not a dead-end concept, but a living reality that inheres in me as me and is closer than my jugular vein. It's more my life than my life. Right? How beautiful. So the idea of Ma taking us to the ledge and then us jumping from the ledge, and in that free fall, we feel what it is to fall in love. That idea we find in the very depiction of Kali, is dancing mad with joy in the cremation ground. She's inviting us, those of us who worship Kali, she's inviting us to embody, as it were, that, where we can like look at the ruins of our life, at the blasted city, and say, wow, there's more room to dance. And you get that flavor in Rumi, a lot. Like this, like, oh, like the news is bad, but inside there's no news. Grasinima posted the Caravanserai. There's like a beautiful Rumi poem where it's like, and by the way, at that time, it's like now, like the political situation is one thing, and it's like a really dark political situation. And at that time, in Rumi's time, the 13th or 14th century in Turkey, they were always on the verge of being invaded by some kingdom nearby. Like there was like a threat of war. And it's so beautiful that Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, which is where like a young boy like questions his existence and tries to think about what like life is really worth. It all happens in the context of impending political disaster. Isn't that beautiful? The best things that have ever been discovered by human civilization, I think, have almost always been articulated within the context of political meltdown and disaster. Think of Athens. There was an active war, Athens versus Sparta, and it was in that Athenian kind of crisis, political crisis, that some of the best thinkers emerged. Even in Kashmir, it wasn't necessarily during the rule of Avantivarman, but the rule of the kings after Avantivarman, where there was a lot of political instability. It was in that time that deep ideas were articulated. Think about the Vietnam War and how in America in like the 60s there were so many new ideas. Think of Berlin. I mean, okay, think about Russia after the fall of the wall, right? Like that's something worth thinking about. Like Russia and Germany. Like they both experienced a kind of renaissance after the Soviet Union collapses, after the Berlin Wall collapses. Like there's suddenly like a renaissance of art. And then what to say of World War II? Like at the end of World War I, you get like really beautiful and edgy ideas, because that's kind of the Kali Bhava. It's when there's political turmoil externally and when there's like turmoil within. It's in that chaos that something new is created. The old is stagnant. Devas can be very stagnant. Asuras can be very dynamic. And the goal is neither to be a deva or an asura. It's just to notice that both the deva and the asura, like in the tarot card Temperance, are like mixing. And in moments when there's like a flux, like, the whole universe, by the way, they call it quantum flux. In modern physics, like in quantum mechanics, the source for the Big Bang is a kind of instability in this quantum field called the quantum flux. So it's like a new theory. And it's that flux that creates the universe, and it's also that flux that destroys the universe. We call this spanda. And spanda arises culturally, socially, economically, especially like philosophically, usually during times of upheaval. Right? How beautiful. Yeah, it's like it's a consistent thing that in times of inconsistency, the human spirit has been called forth in like a really pure way. So looking at the last temptation of Christ, it's clear that like Rama is choosing a harder thing. Krishna is choosing a harder thing. Buddha is choosing a harder thing. Christ is choosing a harder thing. Not because it's a means to an end necessarily. The claim that I'm making is far more dramatic, because it's an end in and of itself. Like there's nothing to rebuild, as it were. It's in the ruins that one can dance. One feels the smashan. So that's the Vijnana Bhairava and the ethos of the Vijnana Bhairava. The only point I really wanted to make there, which has taken me something like an hour and a half to make, because it's my preamble to the Brahman and the stuff that I wanted to talk about. But the whole point I was trying to make is that like it would be a mistake to think that our church offers any absolutes. So even that Hosier line, our church offers no absolutes. It says worship in the bedroom. It's very important that you can't turn that also into an absolute. It's like all of us are different. So all of us need to hear the message differently. We need to practice differently. We need to approach spirituality differently. And it's fair to say that we all have different ideas as to what works and what doesn't work. But we can only say that with regards to our own life. What works and what doesn't work is only going to be adjusted to how we do spirituality, which is necessarily going to be different from how everyone else does spirituality. And hence the Vijnana Bhairava is so beautiful by giving us 112 practices, because 108 names, 1008 names, the very fact there's an 8 there suggests that we don't have to stop at 100 or 1000. The fact that there's there's an extra 2, 112, it doesn't mean that we stop there. It means like continue exploring. And if that's true, notice how this is reflected in the Tantric tradition as a whole, not just in the Vijnana Bhairava, but across the board. The Tantric tradition, if it is anything, it is a proliferation of traditions, of practices. And typically it's a proliferation of deities. That's the first point I want to make. It took me an hour and a half to make that point, but it's okay. I liked that digression. I hope you didn't mind also. So this point that if anything, when we see in the Buddhist tradition or in the quote-unquote Hindu tradition, whenever something gets tantricized, the first thing that happens is a diversification of sadhana, of techniques, which, great masters can then collectivize in groups. Yeah. Brantinath. I should change my name from Nishantanath to Brantinath, the Lord of digression or confusion, the Lord of error. So, error 404 Lord. So then, but I was also like kind of enjoying the idea of like Nishantanatha as in like morning star, right? Like dawn. Anyway, so coming back to this, and by the way, dawn is edgy because it's the end of the night. It must signal something new, and therefore it must signal the end of something old. And Tantra is always doing that. As Vedanta does it, so too does Tantra do it. Pushing kind of the edge. Like it's God's edging, as it were, pushing the edge. So coming back to the breath, notice when I'm totally empty, then I want to breathe in again. That's our yearning for God. We yearn for God the way the exhale yearns for the inhale. But notice, God yearns for us the way the inhale yearns for the exhale. So if I'm full of breath, I can't hold it actually. That would be like holding the seventh note. We just saw how that seventh note is kind of jarring. But it's the eighth note, which mirrors the first note. It's coming back to that which I rejected. It's the Bhupura reclaimed. The return of the Jedi. Like that's what I wanted the whole time. Reject the Jedi, become Sith, become the Jedi again. Like whatever it is, it's the hero's journey. Leave the place, go on a journey, come back to the place. Start on the first note, get to the seventh note, come back to the eighth note, which is the first note. And the world, exactly, the fool to the world. And it's just so important that there's this like completion and there's this wholeness. There's this like coming down the stairs to recognize that the steps are made of the same substance as the roof. Like all of that is there in the breath. So notice, the Vijnana Bhairava is brilliant because it presents the breath as japa. It presents like consciousness as the homa fire, as the puja. It presents the meditation as just being, just resting and reposing in your innate nature. And it presents the breath as a constant, unceasing japa, recitation. Like it just happens on its own. And it's saying something. Each time you breathe, it's saying, I am. What am I? I am that. And what is that? Me. So when I exhale, I'm a human being craving God. And when I'm inhaling, I'm God craving the human being. What actually am I? God or the human being? Neither. And both. This is what Tantra is arguing. It's Spanda, It's Spanda. It's like the most divine person could be the most human, and the most human, the most divine. And to have them both is why we have avatars. So coming to Rāmakrishna now. My whole life is a precarious balance between the Shaiva stuff that I inherited from growing up and the Rāmakrishna stuff. And I'm bringing the Shaiva stuff into the Rāmakrishna stuff. And often the Rāmakrishna stuff that, like, it has the potential to accept it, but it's not. It's a reading that's not current, right? It's like a new reading, as it were. But I don't think so. I think it's an old reading and a valid reading. And to try to articulate a Shaiva or Kaula reading within the Ramakrishna world, I think is exciting because it allows me to interact with the idea of the avatara, which you don't really get in the Shaiva world quite as much. But now we can understand the avatara in a wholly new way. The avatara is like an expression of Kali's desire to experience her fullness, especially in suffering. Not as a means, but as an end in and of itself. And we can also think of the avatara as the greatest expression of Spanda, because we see in Ramakrishna what is, in one sense, a fully exhaled thing, a man, but in the other sense, a fully inhaled thing, God. And it's the inhale and the exhale together. It's that Vijnana Bhairava moment of like Yamala that makes for divinity. So divinity is not one, nor is it the other thing. It's not God, nor is it man, or woman, or person. It's the throb, the pulse, the Spanda between these two polarities, as it were. And in Avatara, we see that. That's why now I can pivot back to Swami Brahmananda, which is exciting. Because, a long time ago, Swami Shivananda had said to Ashokananda and others who were studying the Upanishads, why don't you study our lives? It's a very interesting invitation. It sounds like hubris. Swami Shivananda is saying you'll get more out of studying our lives than from studying the Upanishads. That's crazy. The Upanishads have all the ideas in them. Why then do we care about that person's life? And I explained this quite a bit last time when we were talking. It's like the unique thing about a lineage is that there are people. There are people in that lineage. And what the people in that lineage are doing is giving their lives to the ideas that we're reading about in the $8 Signet Classics Upanishads that we bought off of Amazon, And that's really, really good. Yeah, I'm so happy, Kalidasi. Whoa, that's beautiful. Shiva is saying Kali becoming a cloud and raining down as Krishna. Feels a lot like this in and out of breath you're describing, right? It's like Kali becoming Krishna, Krishna becoming Kali, that Kali Krishna connection is really maybe arguably like the whole theory of the avatara rests upon this. And Krishna's like humanness is important too, I think, and his divineness is no less important. But as time goes by, notice what we do. We ossify things, meaning we take something that was dynamic and we try to make it static. So we try to like flatten characters that are round. That's what I think is interesting. If you look at Christ, he becomes like flat Kurt Cobain. Do you know what I mean? Like, you forget all the complexities of his ethnicity, but we also forget all the complexities of his psychology. And the same with the Buddha, the same with Krishna, with Rama. In fact, they even become blue. After a while, they become so demarcated from their own humanity that we even painted them a different color. They're like Avatara, like in the like movie sense. Like, they're like tall, like blue, like, you know, like aliens now. It's kind of funny, right? Like the James Cameron Avatar series, or Avatar, like I can say Avatar and Avatara. The Avatara is become the Avatar now. It's like Tantra becomes Tantra. The avatars have become avatars. Because like now they're not even human. The guy is purple now, blue now. What the fuck? That was a human. Like, Krishna was brown probably. Right? And so was Rama. And so was Buddha. And definitely so was Christ. But now they're not. Christ is now white. And those other guys are like blue. Like, look what we do. Forgive us, Father. We know not what we do. We take humans and we demand that they become plastic dashboard figurines. But in doing that, what are we doing? We're getting rid of the throb, the spanda. We're taking one thing and making it one part of the polarity, meaning we're saying it's God, just God. And hence the humanness is gone. But what's interesting about Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother and Vivekananda and Brahmananda and the others is that they're avatars. Like, they're all considered avatars, especially Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Vivekananda. But we include here also Brahmananda. They're avatars, right? Therefore, we have in contemporary history. No, Kali is the one looking at the dashboard, at the reflection of Kali in the Murti. Right? Kali is not on your dashboard. Kali's Murti is on your dashboard. Kali is that throb, that pulse that happens between you and the Murti as you're driving. That's Kali. Isn't that interesting? Like, I don't mind, like, desecrating altars. You know, that's my whole problem, is that people are like, you have no reverence. I'm like, yeah, because if what you mean by reverence is like ossification, is objects gain more importance than the objectifier. Like, if your objects are more important than your subjects, then what you have is religion, and I'll have no part of it. You know, but like, the idea is like, who cares for a Murti? You are the Murti. But then this love that we feel, the throb, the pulse between one thing and another, that liminal space is Kali. That liminality, the threshold between object and subject. Yeah. Sono is saying, when I put up the Kali on the dashboard, I immediately got pulled over by the cops. That's so funny. Oh yeah, let's get a bobblehead Kali. You guys, it's about time we get a gift shop up in here, you know, like what the fuck? Like, we should just descend into outright, like, consumer capitalism at this point. We should just, like, have a gift shop and, like, charge, like, lots of money for t-shirts and things like that. Yeah, and okay, my readings on the Gita, yeah, okay, you know what? Like, yeah, what am I even thinking? Like, at some point, so I've been describing Krishna as a menace. Because isn't he that motherfucker? Like, in the Bhagavatam, look what he does. He tells gopis, anyway, I don't need to get into it, but like, what the fuck, Krishna? What the fuck? You told the embodiment of dharma, Yudhishthira, to lie. You told Arjuna to go and kill his guru and like initiate a war that will call in the Kali Yuga, and you're getting gopikas to like practice adharma in the name of religion. Like, Krishna, what the fuck? And it's easy to understand in the context of Kalikula. He's like Narada. He's just like this like chaos agent almost, because there's something distinctly spiritual and religious about ruin. And Rumi teaches us that love, Krishna, comes in the form of, you know, love comes and takes away our prayer beads, yanks it out of our hands. Like, even God, like, God kills God. Like Ramakrishna cutting Kali or killing the Buddha on the road or something. Love comes and snatches away our prayer beads. And what does he leave behind? Song and dance. In the neighborhood of ruin, we drink to the dregs. Like, oh, what a thing. Yeah, like, love comes and takes away our prayer beads and leaves behind song and dance. Because what are prayer beads? They represent religion, they represent structure, they represent sadhana, which is all very important, by the way. All of those things serve a purpose. They're part of the knowledge process. Rejecting ignorance requires duality, requires knowledge. Non-duality requires that we go beyond ignorance and knowledge to something that looks like madness for the wise. You know, religion is wise and good. Spirituality, if I want to make this distinction here, to the wise looks like folly because it's the other end of the same thing that you were rejecting when you got started out. It's like coming back to the eighth. It's so different from the one, but it is the one. And if you're like going on the journey to the seven, that's scary, right? It looks like you're going back. So sometimes going forward looks like going back, and that's spanda because it's neither going one way or the other. It's pulsing between the bindu and the bupura, and the bupura and the bindu. And this I just cannot ignore. This feeling, this recognition. All the vampires are on Ventura Boulevard, and all the good girls are at home with broken hearts. Anyway, coming back to this very, very important theory, this model. It's only a theory and it's only a model insofar as there isn't a life to live it. And that's why avatars are important. If you like see Ramakrishna or Vivekananda or Sarada, what we're seeing is like what that looks like in a living, breathing person. That's spanda, because that person is dynamic. You know, once I asked my guru if I needed to get a murti of Sri Ramakrishna. He was like, why? You have a photo of him. In one sense, isn't it better that there's a photo of Ramakrishna than like we sculpt a murti of him? Because if we had a murti, like a physical depiction of Ramakrishna, that's fine. But there's also a photo of him, and the photo is closer to the person, the living, breathing person. And then we have the gospel, where in the gospel we encounter like leelas of Ramakrishna. But when we come back to Swami Shivananda's claim here, he's like saying like, you know, you could study the Upanishads, that would be okay. That's good to start out with. But then why don't you study our lives? So this is the offering that the lineage has to give. Like you just have people's lives, you know, you have Shivananda's lives, you have letters of Swami Shivananda, you have letters of Swami Turiyananda, you have like Ashokananda's life, you have everyone's life, like so many people that you can study. And of course you can study Vivekananda and Brahmananda quite a bit because there's a lot of literature about them. Of course, Vivekananda especially, because he wrote so much, he didn't write so much, he lectured so much and so much like available about what he taught in his own words in English. That's very helpful. But there's also so many biographers, like the life of Swami Vivekananda, volume 1 and volume 2, Swami Vivekananda in America, New Discoveries, like all sorts of stuff, Nikhilananda's biography. And that seems to do more for us, spiritually speaking, than maybe studying the Upanishads or studying the Tantras. That's why this book is so important. So I talked a little bit about it on Thursday. It's called The Eternal Companion, composed by Swami Prabhavananda, a biography on his guru, Swami Brahmananda, who he claims to be still the head of the Hollywood temple, or he's like the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, which means a lot of different things, and we'll talk about it in just a bit. But this book is important because it's like a story of this guy's life, and like describing scenes from his life. But unlike Vivekananda, he had a very quiet life, right? Like his life was entirely internal. He's a necessary foil to Swami Vivekananda, because in this lineage you can get the sense that like the only way to practice it is through this like active plunging into the world, serving God in the form of individuals, like that kind of Vivekananda kind of thing. But that's half of the picture. The other half is Swami Brahmananda, in whose lineage we belong, and in whose example we're trying to mold ourselves, because his life was pure spirituality in the contemplative sense, whereas Swami Vivekananda's life was pure spirituality with an emphasis on the active sense. So Swamiji is like Kriya, he's like Jnana, to use those like somewhat dated tantric terms of action and knowledge. Both are Jnana, but Jnana expressed differently. One as devotional theism, which is expressed as a kind of inward contemplative life. The other is a kind of non-dual, extroverted, non-theism almost, but theism. Both of them are theist, but the expression seems to be diametrically opposed, and to understand both of them together is to be a bit confused, and that's good. That's called spanda. Isn't that so beautiful? Like Swami Brahmananda is a pole, Swami Vivekananda is a pole, and Ramakrishna is that which pulses between those two poles and is the reconciliation of those two poles. That's why I think you need them both. Like, you can't even think of Holy Mother. Holy Mother is Ramakrishna's Shakti. And that Shakti is Ramakrishna bouncing between Vivekananda and Brahmananda. How beautiful. And that gives us 5 points. Holy Mother, Raja Maharaj, Swamiji, and of course one's own Guru and Sri Ramakrishna. That's like 5 points. And in our case, the pentagram is inverted. But, like for many people, it's like, these are the 5 points that you have to go off of. Yeah, Deepalila, I think that's the idea. And like the great joys that we feel and the great tragedies that we feel, life is that which pulses between these two poles. So coming to Swami Brahmananda now, this is an important book because when we read about his life, we find that in the Leela, like episodes of his life, we find that there's like wonderful examples of these concepts, which we find in the Upanishads and in the Tantras. We find them lived, and that drives them home in a wholly new way. So therefore, I wanted to play a little bit with the concept of the Ishta Devata or Ishta Devata, because you'll see in Tantra, there are, like I was saying in the beginning, before my 2-hour digression, there's so many different methods, right? So many different modalities. But what that like practically looks like for the practitioner is different ishtas to choose from, meaning different deities that can become your main focus. So like while you might be worshipping many deities in the puja, you're particularly doing puja to that deity which either you chose based on your own proclivity or that your guru chose for you based on their understanding of your proclivity. Chances are the two interact with one another. What you want is probably what leads you to take a diksha into that particular deity, and then that deity is who you worship every day in puja, in ritualistic worship. There's homa, which is part of the puja where you like offer the same things that you would offer in puja, except you do that to a fire. And then there's japa, which is the repetition of that deity's name. So unlike the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, which is atypical as far as Tantra is concerned, representing of course a very high and non-dual teaching, most tantras are just going to give you puja, japa, homa, but mostly around a particular deity. So now there are fierce deities, ghora kinds of deities, and then there are saumya kinds of deities. Generally, not always, but generally, the saumya deities are right hand path. Right? Like, so like right hand, again, it's a dated word, means somewhat Vaidika, like rule-oriented, para tantra. It's more social, it's more acceptable in the sense that it is ascribing to Vaidika dharma, Vedic ideals of purity and impurity and whatnot. And dharma, like morality and things like that. Then you get the other form, which is the ghora forms, which are like the non-dual, often, not always non-dual, but often leaning towards non-dual, immanence-oriented goddess forms. So even in the goddess tradition, there are Saumya goddesses, which tend to be on the right, and there are Ghora goddesses, which tend to be on the left. But from a Shaiva point of view, once you get the goddess, you already start moving left, because Vamachara, as we're reinterpreting it, or rather as we are revisiting it, I don't say reinterpreting to suggest that this is a new interpretation. I think this is maybe the OG interpretation. Like Vamachara doesn't mean being immoral and like indulging in the senses. Rather, it means worshipping the goddess, which sometimes has the effect of turning somebody into a degenerate. But like that's not Vamachara. Vamachara isn't the degeneracy of values and norms. It's rather the effect of worshipping the goddess. Worshipping the goddess is the point of Vamachara, right? So like Vama means left. So Vama is where Sita would have sat if Rama didn't send her off into the forest. To his left, he would have done a V. So like when you think of Shiva, it's the one to his left, which is Vama, Shivaya. The mantra says Shiva, Vama, and Yamala. The union of Vama, Vamakshi or Vamangi, with Shiva. So Vama, meaning the goddess, Vamachara, meaning the way of the goddess, is that tradition which tends to be non-dual, tends to be immanence-oriented, tends to be kind of avaidika in that it transgresses Vedic norms, and sometimes, of course, even as we transgress Vedic norms, inevitably we're also going to have to transgress Abrahamic norms. And arguably most of our norms as civilizations are based off of either the Vedas or the Abrahamic worldview, you know? So like this tradition is often done in secret, and it's kind of antisocial, and it's a smashan-oriented tradition. But notice, the representation of this tradition is Ghora-type goddesses, fanged goddesses, cremation ground goddesses. Bye, Jaima. I love that. Good night. I'm playing early tomorrow morning. I love that. That's exactly. Exactly. And then on the right, you get mostly male forms, but if they're goddess forms, you tend to find more Samya forms, generally. So on the spectrum of Tantra, right and left, essentially, whether it's a Ghora form or a Samya form, it's going to be some form of Deity Yoga. And what differentiates the left from the right is not necessarily the type of puja, it might just be the type of offering and the type of deity to whom those offerings are made. So the Ghora deities tend to like what are called transgressive offerings, panchamakaras, whereas the Saumya deities reject those. They don't like those offerings. They prefer a different kind of energy. So it has to do with energies, like frequencies and flavors and things like that. But the structure of the puja more or less stays the same. The sequence of mantras, most of the mantras are shared among both ends of the spectrum. And arguably, there's a big middle ground also, where they don't lean all the way to the left, and nor are they like bound by the normative standards of the right. Rather, they're somewhere in the middle, and most of us are there. I think most tantrikas are somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. And again, we have another spectrum, where there's the extreme left, which is like curses and things like that, and the extreme right, which is the most puritanical Vedic kind of thing you could ever imagine. And then fluctuating between those two poles is lived experience Tantra. You know, that's beautiful. That's what Tantra is. It's neither one nor the other. You need 2 hands to clap and 2 hands to pray. Once I was speaking to a Buddhist monk, and I was like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? And I said, I asked him, like, but which hand is it? It's like, because I'm like, if it's the left, I'll high five you. I'm kidding. And we're doing like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Like, nothing. Silence. But we want to clap. And 2 electrodes for electricity. Yeah, Yamala, all of that. So Tantra should be the whole spectrum. We don't have to, like, our church offers no absolutes. We don't have to say, like, one is more important than the other. But even some people argue like one is a precedent for the other. And I do agree with this. I do think that the right hand path stuff is often quite helpful to do for a while and get grounded in before starting to explore the left. In other words, it wouldn't make sense to be in the Bhupura and say, I'm at the Bindu, if we haven't been to the Bindu. And to go from the Bhupura to the Bindu requires that knowledge phase, where we reject those things that are actually for us in that time impure. But then as we get closer to the Bindu, then it makes sense to say, the more I understand of the Bindu, the more I can feel of the Bhupura. And more I'm realizing this really is the dark side. Like from a Star Wars point of view, it's like, more and more is Palpatine's speech to Anakin seeming to hit, where it's like, if one is to understand the Force in all of its aspects, one cannot just go with the dogmatic view of the Jedi, as it were, right? Like the idea is like, well, maybe there's like ways to do spirituality that aren't the ways that are prescribed by institutions. But this is important. That doesn't invalidate those. That's the claim. It's like somebody once said, oh, the Buddha gave a middle finger to Hinduism. And my response there was to say, and in response, Hinduism gave a high five. Right? It's like that. It's like whatever they may say of Kaulachara or Vamachara, whatever like shade they want to throw at it, Vamachara will never do the same in response. Because the like, why would a person who is judged by everyone themselves judge anyone? It's kind of an interesting thing. And if one isn't going to judge, one has to be judged. Because the whole world must function through knowledge. And knowledge requires judging something as ignorance. Yeah, so there's like a song, it's like, I do it for the girls and the gays, that's it. I'm like, yeah, almost like, I think it's the same thing. I think Vamachara, you have to be like trans or gay or minority or like outcast. There has to be something wrong with you, I think, before you can come to this part of Tantra. I don't know. But like you have to like really get used to being outcast, as it were. And now I'm finally understanding why Shiva and Kali are outcast deities. Even in right-hand path Tantra, when they're worshipping Shiva, you can't deny the mortuary symbolism there, although you can downplay it. And you can't deny that he is an outcast deity, which is unique to Shiva. Like Shiva is a liminal deity who exists outside of society and outside of like structures, institutions, although there are institutions that are built in that tradition. So there are institutions of Shiva, namely Shaiva Siddhanta. There are institutions of Ramakrishna, namely Belramat and Ramakrishna and whatnot. And like all of that is valid. It's almost like upon that Kali dances, But yeah, so I'm uniquely, I think, trying to like discover bolder ways to articulate where we stand on that spectrum. Because I think the problem here is when people assume that I'm representing Belramat or like the Vedanta Society of Southern California or of Northern California or like anything, I'm not. I'm representing something, but it doesn't necessarily have to be what they represent. So I've been having these nice conversations with my Gurudeva and with some of the people at the Vedanta Society. Because, they're like receiving letters and stuff about like some of the things that I do. And it's like, okay, he's doing Bali. Yeah, so like they're like, okay, what do we do about this? Because they're like, people are sending like media packets to the Hollywood Temple and to the Kali Mandir. And they're like, yeah, like it puts us in an awkward position because your PR doesn't look so good right now. But also that's going to affect our PR because like we have endorsed you and supported you. So now the question is like, how do I best protect those institutions, which I love and want to protect? Like I want to protect the reputation of the Ramakrishna lineage and the Vedanta Society of Southern California and the Kali Mandir, but they're uniquely like right-hand path kind of places. Hollywood Vedanta Temple less so than the Kali Mandir, and you know why? It's because the Kali Mandir is outright a Kali temple, and Kali often has the connotation of the left, and so they have to do like extra work to protect their reputation. And it's no joke, like in the text themselves it says the reasons why Vamachara must be kept secret is because it is to protect the reputation of Shaiva Acharyas. How can anybody teach Shaivism if by the eyes of society they're like seen as a degenerate? And how can the Kali Mandir serve an ever-growing community of devout practitioners if it's discredited as like this left-hand path kind of place? So it takes extra caution to present itself and be, the place of true integrity, to be like sattvic and stuff, right? So I'm kind of a outside dog type. I'm Bhairava, Kshetrapala. So they're willing to accept me because they get it. But now the problem is, what will happen now if they're receiving like all these like media packets and like stuff like that, like that make it almost seem that to endorse me would be to endorse Vamachara. Because they can't and they shouldn't endorse Vamachara. So one thing I think I need to do moving forward is this. I need to be very careful here. Although I am in this lineage of Ramakrishna, and although that like my guru Swami Sarvadevananda, it's also important to remember that he is the head minister of the Vedanta Society of Southern California. And the philosophy of the Vedanta Society of Southern California is aligned with the philosophy of Bellarmine, which necessarily must be, because it's a very important institution that serves a huge international community, it must be more right-leaning. It must be more like orthodox. And there's so many ways in which they're already being extremely unorthodox. The last thing they need right now is accusations of Vamachara, Kaulachara, because that makes all the very important liminal work they're doing like not valuable. You see, you need a Shaiva Siddhanta. Like, if there's no Shaiva Siddhanta, Shaivism cannot be taught, ever. Like, no one will access the Kali teachings if there isn't Shaiva Siddhanta. But thank God for Shaiva Siddhanta, because they do their best to, like, not purify, but kind of, it's not apologize either, but almost like push aside or veil anything that might be too controversial in the eyes of society, that which gives Shaivism some place to stand, you know. Just recently, I got a bunch of texts and messages on Instagram where people were like, you were supposed to like defend Shaivism, like what happened to you? Like now you'll like not be able to do that anymore. Like your ability to like represent a tradition is obviously going to be compromised by Vamachara, Kaulachara allegations, because a lot of times like the discrediting thing here is the bali, is the use of like alcohol and intoxicants. Like that's the discrediting feature, right? So even now, like today I'm getting emails from monks with quotations from the Gospel of Rāmakrishna and from Swami Vivekananda, like kind of calling out Vamachara as like not correct. Do you know, but they mean well. These are like other monks that are just like, oh my God, like don't go the Vamachara route, don't go the Kaulachara route. Like that's not cool. That's not okay. And I get where they're coming from, but that's per the Bellarmine and Vedanta Society interpretation of Ramakrishna, which is valid and cool. So now, to be responsible, I have to distance myself from that. So I have to say, like, wait, like, I'm now going to offer a reading, and I have been offering a reading, and with an increasing boldness in the past few lectures and past few months, I'm offering a reading on Ramakrishna, which I fully think is valid within Ramakrishna, which everyone will agree is valid within Ramakrishna, but it's just not what Bellarmine represents, and not what Bellarmine should represent. So it's almost as if you can think of Bellarmine and the Vedanta Societies of America as a kind of Shaiva Siddhanta. You know, we need that. That is very important. But you know, with Shaiva Siddhanta, you have one end of the spectrum, and then you also have this like Vamachara, Kaulachara part of the spectrum. So I'm just going to try, I'm going to try to like represent this part of the tantric spectrum a bit. And of course, it's like, we'll see how far we get with that. But the idea is that like, okay, at least now let's like be very clear. This is not the line that is taken by my guru and my guru's like institution. Right here, I have to step outside, as it were, and kind of say like, okay, this is a different reading, and again, just place it in the marketplace of ideas. And for those to whom it will mean something, good. For many people, of course, they should be aware, though. I think the real problem here comes in a lack of transparency as to what I'm representing. There, I have to apologize, because like maybe I should be really absolutely clear about where and from what point of view I'm speaking, because I'm trying to represent the whole spectrum. And I think have, to some extent, like presented the right path stuff when I was more involved in that, and then presented some of the like middle stuff. But now I'm trying to present the like left stuff. You know, so like now, like in this phase of my career, as I'm moving left, personally also, and trying to express the left-hand stuff, I'm realizing now that like, oh, I should be clearer. I should be clear this is what I'm doing. Because when I was in my more right-hand kind of phase, then it made sense actually for the Vedanta Society and for the Kali Mandir to endorse me more publicly as they did. Because at that time I was still kind of speaking from a philosophy that was more shared. So even though now we're all sharing Ramakrishna, these are all different interpretations on Ramakrishna. So I think that is the place where we need to be most transparent in our community, to be like, okay, like, yeah, for better or for worse, this is Vamachara, this is Kaulachara. And it's not the only thing that we do. I don't want to be pigeonholed into that. I don't want to be like only like a Vamachara, Kaulachara teacher. Because sometimes that can happen too. You get radicalized, polarized. Like when you get chased out of the temple, there's a sense in which you're like, okay, that's bad, like this is good. Like no, like our church offers no absolutes. Like the whole spectrum is important, and we need both hands to clap. You know? So yeah, like I think just let's call a spade a spade. This is Vamachara. This is Kaulachara, right? Like this is Sri Ramakrishna Leela Prasanga, like in the period where he's like in the forest doing sadhanas with Bhairavi Brahmani. That's the Ramakrishna that I'm speaking to and I'm trying to represent. So when we come to Sri Ramakrishna's direct disciple, this is also important. There's no one reading on Ramakrishna because all the direct disciples seem to have so many different views on Ramakrishna. There's one very interesting example, so Swami Vivekananda was criticized, of course, for a lot of things, but when he got back to India, he came back with a bunch of like American disciples, mostly female, and so somebody came up to him and they were like, this is not proper for a monk to be in the company, in the presence of female disciples. And Swami Vivekananda kind of thundered back to this brother disciple of his, and he said, I don't see things like man and woman. Sri Ramakrishna taught me a different thing than he taught you. You stick to what he taught you. I'll do what he taught me, or something like that, right? So that's an important scene, because what Vivekananda is saying is that his interpretation on Sri Ramakrishna is colored by what Sri Ramakrishna taught him and told him, and that might be a different thing than what Sri Ramakrishna taught and told this person. So even between two direct disciples who were there in Sri Ramakrishna's presence, you get two very different interpretations. That's why having the Gospel of Luke alongside John, alongside Mark, alongside Matthew, that's important, because they're all giving a different account of the same person. And the stories do more or less corroborate, but they're also very important places in which they don't. And that's important, I think. That's where you get the spanda. It's in those digressions and those like failures to overlap. That's where there's like a spanda, right? Those disagreements. And when you come to like the more expanded gospels of say Judas and of James and of Mary and of Philip and things like that, of Thomas, then you're like, whoa. If I'm going to take seriously that these were all people that like saw Jesus, and by the way, there are historical reasons to suggest that that's not the case, but playing with the idea that these are all people that saw Jesus, if I'm going to take it seriously that they're all offering me a reading on Jesus, I should also take it seriously that they're all offering very different readings on Jesus. And you know what happened in the institution of Christianity? 4 of those readings were accepted as valid. Haven't you noticed? Like in the New Testament, there are like 4 gospels, right? I think, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but they're like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, right? Okay, like those are the ones that more or less agree with one another. It makes sense to me why Thomas or Philip would not be included, why Mary would not be included. Of course, there are historical reasons to suggest that those were like later texts and whatnot, but doesn't it seem like the Nicene Creed or like the ecumenical councils of early Christianity were making institutional decisions as to what texts were kosher and what texts weren't? And that's exactly what we do in Tantra. In Tantra, we take some texts and we say, okay, this is what's worth reading, and all the other stuff is like non-traditional, non-canon, don't worry about it. That's what Shaiva Siddhanta will do. I kid you not. They take a bunch of tantras and they say these 28 tantras are authoritative. Those 64 other tantras, don't look at them because they're false. Whereas on the Vamachara side, we say all the tantras, all 91 of them are all legit. But again, we're saying the same thing. We're kind of like, adjudicating which text we should take seriously. And again, the Tattvic tradition, like I said in the beginning, is sensitive to your needs. So when you approach a tradition, you have to find those things that are part of your own expression, your own proclivity. So if we don't offer a Kaulachara or Vamachara reading of Sri Ramakrishna, that then robs Sri Ramakrishna of some of his richness and diversity. But we have to admit that that's not what Bellarmine is going to do, and that's not what the Vedanta Societies of Southern California are going to do, and that's not what the Kali Mandir Laguna Beach is going to do. And thank God, because those are huge institutions that like cater to a huge like in growing international community of people who are just coming into spiritual life. Right? So like I just want to like now like just be so clear that I'm stepping away from those institutions, because in the sense that what I'm going to say is not going to be what they're going to say. And that's okay. That's all right. And that should be the case. In fact, a long time ago, when I asked my like guru about all of this, one of the first things he told me was to see what other people are doing and do something else. And of course, the only problem is that like I'm growing in my sadhana, so things are changing. And so for some years, of course, the narrative, like everything that I will say will probably come from anecdotes. Like they'll come from the ways in which the teachings are appearing in my life. And that's changed a lot. I think some people were even remarking, it's like in the spring Atlanta retreat versus like the most recent Atlanta retreat, they were like, oh my God. And I can see where the lack of transparency would be, because it's like if they're expecting Nish in spring and they instead get Nish in winter, they're like, wait, this is false advertising. So like, let me try to be clearer about that advertising then, is they're like, okay, like this is different. And therefore like my guru, certainly not my guru, and certainly not the Vedanta Society or the Kali Mandir should be held responsible for this at all. Like this is like, hold on, let me find, let me just Sorry, I don't know where to mute. It's okay. Oh, there we go. So it's like really important now to articulate this Ramakrishna. And the reason why I think it's important to do so is because it's in the lives of these individuals, say Swami Brahmananda or Swami Vivekananda, it's in the lives of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother that these ideas can be articulated. So when we think of Vamachara, when we think of Kaulachara, it's like, let's hold on to Sri Ramakrishna. And more importantly, let's hold on to Sri Ramakrishna's life and teachings with with regards to these things. Yes? So coming to the Brahmananda case, it's so beautiful because okay, first of all, it's beautiful to consider all the various direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna because you'll see that they all have a different reading on Sri Ramakrishna. So much so they sometimes disagree with one another as to how to read him. So when Swami Vivekananda is suggesting this approach, which we can consider kind of like an authoritative approach within Sri Ramakrishna, it's rejected by some of the direct disciples. We get this scene at the end of the gospel where Swamiji says, Swamiji is their leader, he says something like, okay, now since I'm a higher caste than you, prepare my smoke and massage my feet. And one of the other direct disciples says, I will do no such thing. And then M remarks there, he's like, how wonderful that they're all thinking for themselves, that they're all individuals. And this is what I'd like to encourage too. Like we can look at what the Belrumat Vedanta Society traditions have to offer about Ramakrishna, and we can accept them. But we don't have to. We're allowed to think for ourselves. And we're allowed to go off of our own interpretation of Sri Ramakrishna. This is my interpretation of Sri Ramakrishna, based on the Kaulachara Tantras or the Vama Tantras. Based on what we call the Shakta Tantras, actually. This is what I think is Shaktism, like the worship of the Divine Mother. Like this is what I feel like from the Shaiva tradition that I grew up in. This is what I feel like it looks like. But that's one interpretation. Now, when M is remarking that we have these disciples that were all with Sri Ramakrishna, but they all heard something different from him, that's important, because it's exactly the point I tried to make at the beginning of this talk, that Tantra, if it is anything at all, it is a diversification of means, with the understanding that everyone who comes to Tantra is of a different predisposition and therefore needs to hear the same truth differently, and they also need to practice that truth differently. And what that practice looks like for the most part is selecting an Ishta, an ideal, a deity, and then doing worship of that deity, which ultimately, and this is so important, ultimately then culminates in identifying with that deity. And through becoming one with the deity through ritualistic worship of that deity, through the doorway of that deity, one attains that absolute, that reality which is beyond all deity forms and yet present in all deity forms. So that's like kind of the logic of Tantra. There are so many different deities because necessarily there are so many different practitioners. Each path is really a deity. So there's the Kali path, and then there's the Bhairava path, there's the Shiva path, there's like all these different margas. And even within the Kali path, now there's like a Dakshinachara Kali path. Whereas Dakshina Kali doesn't necessarily mean Dakshinachara. For the first time in history, there might be a Dakshinachara Kali path. But then traditionally, Kali has almost always been a Vamachara deity, as we find in her Sahasranama and whatnot. So now I'm at a very confusing point where it's like to worship Kali, in the terms of the text, seem to bring you necessarily, by the flavor of the text, into a more Vamachara world. But then I'm sharing the name Kali with many people who are interpreting that name in a more Dakshinachara context. Therein lies the rub. Right? It's like I'm saying Kali and they're saying Kali, but by Kali we mean different things, and both interpretations, in fact all interpretations, are valid. So there's a way to do Kali without eating onions, garlic, eating meat, drinking liquor, or using drugs. There's like a way to do Kali without any of the Yamala like stuff. There's a way to do Kali without any animal sacrifice or like anything like that. That's awesome. It's awesome that people can do the Kali path in this new way now. And there's also a way to do Kali that takes you into some of these like more Vamachara areas. In either case, though, it's about the Ishta and your choice to like worship that Ishta, which determines what offerings we make and when we practice the puja and like what that looks like and whether it's more dualistic or non-dualistic view. Everything about the philosophical structure, about the practice structure, everything just comes down to choice of deity. And it could be your choice, or it could be the guru's choice, or it could be some kind of combination of the two things. Having said that, though, if Tantra is anything, it is a proliferation of deities, a proliferation of options, a proliferation of paths. Just to adjust to the fact that there are so many different practitioners. And I think that's Sri Ramakrishna's idea of the mother that gives the 5 different types of meals. You know, she's got 5 children, and they all have different tastes and digestive abilities. That's important too. Like we take into consideration our taste and our digestive ability. What can we handle actually? And what do we like? And so the mother, taking this into consideration, gives 5 different meals with the same fish. The same reality can be prepared and presented in different ways. As fish porridge, as fish curry, as spicy pickles, whatever. Like it can be all these different things. And the point is that everyone is being nourished, eating the meal that they like the most. Okay, cool. So having said all of that, I think it's a really interesting question to ask. Who was Swami Brahmananda's Ishta? Because like I think that question will shed a lot of light on the way that all these paths can be harmonized in Ramakrishna. That was originally supposed to be the talk, but I think I'll stop somewhere here because I think already we've heard quite a bit about the approach in Tantra. It was Swami Brahmananda Jayanti earlier this week on Tuesday, and just yesterday at the Hollywood Vedanta Temple, we celebrated it in a very big way. We celebrated Raja Maharaj Jayanti. So I was thinking, all this is like fresh in my mind. I was thinking, okay, let's just look at his life, and let's think about who his Ishta could be. I could make a case for Rama, I could make a case for Krishna, I could make a case for Kali, I could make a case for Ramakrishna, and I could make a case for the formless absolute. And I think to do that would be valuable because it would show that like in a person's life, they could actually have more than one Ishta maybe, because the Ramakrishna ideal shows you that it's just fish. There's only one fish, though there's many ways to cook that fish. And someone like Raja Maharaj, who is a spiritual successor or spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, is like Sri Ramakrishna, able to eat fish in many different ways. He's able to capture more of the spectrum. And there is something very spanda about that, something very like inherently Shaktism about it, where it's like, no, it's not any one thing. It's all these things. So I was going to, for the next hour or so, I won't, we'll just go into Q&A now, but I was going to like go into all the possible Ishtas that Swami Brahmananda could have had, and I'm going to give like stories from his life to make a case for one or for the other. So I could say like, oh, like it's Rama for these reasons, because he's a spiritual son. Sri Ramakrishna's family worshipped Raghavir. Maybe it made sense to give him Rama mantra. That would make sense because he had Ram Nam instituted. Why would he have Ram Nam instituted if Rama was not his Ishta? But then I could also make a case for Krishna because he's considered to be Rakal. And on his like dying day, on his deathbed, he like saw Krishna and said, put ankles on my feet. I'm going to go dance with Krishna. But then also I could make a case for Ma Kali, because one day he was sitting in the Nat Mandir looking at Kali, and Sri Ramakrishna walked up to him and said, hey look, it's your Ishta, and then he saw his Ishta. I could make a case for a male deity because Swami Prabhavananda uses the word he when he talks about the Ishta. Like there's so many arguments that I could make, and in making them I can show you episodes of Swami Brahmananda's life, which I think would be fun and valuable. But anyway, I'll do that next time. So if you see this book, this is your homework. This could be fun. In this book, I'm just going to put out this question. Who was Swami Brahmananda's Ishta? Isn't that a fun activity? So as you read this, I'd like to ask, who do you think his Ishta was? Sri Ramakrishna gave him an Ishta. Is it one Ishta? Was it many Ishtas? It seems to be one Ishta. Who do you think it was? Just like in the pantheon of Hindu deities. And by the way, there's like some Jesus stuff that's really interesting too, because he had a vision of Jesus one time doing a Christmas puja where he offered wine and Christmas cake to Jesus. Right? I was just gonna say, it's like so funny that we like, you guys, it's so funny that at the Hollywood Vedanta Temple, they read the Katha Upanishad during Swami Vivekananda Jayanti, and at the same time offer Swami Vivekananda bacon and cigarettes. That's the most Ramakrishna thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, Vamachara comes down to the kind of offerings you're going to make. And like bacon and cigarettes are probably as Vamachara as it gets in terms of offerings, right? That's like 2 of the 5 makaras. And so we give Vivekananda Panchamakaras, or at least Dvimakaras, 2 of the 5 makaras, alongside a reading of the Katha Upanishad. That's like such a right hand, like right now I could launch into a heated rebuttal of the Katha Upanishad. I can point to the false dichotomies inherent within it, the repressive kind of like language that can cause a person to think that there's something foolish or wrong. I can draw from Vivekananda to show that like we don't move from error to truth, but from truth to higher truth. I can explain why Swamiji liked the Katha Upanishad, and I can explain how it has nothing to do with the falsely dichotomous tradition that the Katha Upanishad seems like, all of that. And notice the fact that they're both there at the same time shows you that Ramakrishna is one complicated motherfucker, you know? And like, to come to Ramakrishna is to come to a paradox. And if it's not a paradox, Bhairavi Nicola says, then maybe it's not divine. So what is Tantra? The question is, what is it not? If anything, it is a divine paradox. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu Shri Kali Arpanam Astu. Jai Ma Kali, Jai Thakur, Jai Thakur. Jai Ma.